I'm going to call the City Council meeting to order. If everyone could take a moment to silence their cell phones. This is kind of funny. I'm actually watching the entire audience silence their cell phones. That's very good. The clock on the wall, we just realized, is not correct, so it is 5 o'clock. If you'll please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We will begin with a couple of important recognitions this evening, and the first is to welcome and recognize AB Tech, Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College's president, Dr. Dennis King. And if you'll come up, I'm going to come down. Is this working? It is. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. King first. In August of last year, Dr. Dennis King became the 6th president of AB Tech Community College here in Asheville. Dr. King joined AB Tech in 1992 as vice president for student services, where he held that position for 20 years. He was appointed special assistant to the president for reaccreditation in 2012 and served as interim president from January to July of 2014. Before joining AB Tech, Dr. King was vice president of student services at Lake City Community College, and he also held positions at Florida Institute of Technology and Jacksonville University. Dr. King served in the U.S. Army from 1968 to 1972, achieving the rank of company commander and earning a Bronze Star for meritorious service in 1972. We are pleased to recognize Dr. King and welcome you here tonight. Thank you for coming, and we would love for you to make a few comments if you have time and could share with us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All that tells you is that I'm old. But seriously, I'm very honored to get the opportunity to come in and speak with you this evening. A few days ago, I guess it was Sunday 2 weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the Mount Olive Baptist Church over on Livingston Street, and so I did. And when I went to the dais to speak, I said, "Welcome." And of course, everyone looked at me and said, Why are you welcoming us to our church? You're the guest here. And the point I was trying to make is that I have heard over the years that many people don't feel welcomed at AB Tech, and that's going to change. We want everyone to know that AB Tech is their community college, paid for by their taxes, and the African American community over on Livingston Street needs to know that just as much as everyone else. So I wanted to let them know that they are in fact welcome on our campus. We had graduation a week ago on Saturday, and over 1,000 people earned degrees, diplomas, and certificates. And I think that that's an incredible number of individuals who have opened the way to a successful career in this community or elsewhere. Over 90% of our students will remain in the Asheville and Buncombe County area. So of that 1,000 people who earned certificates, degrees, and diplomas, 900 of them will continue to remain in this community, adding to the value of this community. We are definitely Asheville's and Buncombe County's community college, and I want that clearly known by everyone. So again, thank you for allowing me to come in this evening. I did only put $1 in the meter outside, so I think I'm maybe getting a ticket momentarily. Thank you.
We have the honor of having several crew members from the USS Asheville here. And I'm wearing my hat that I got from last year. My crew said they want a hat too. I'm the only one that has one, so my crew. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor.
Do you want to bring all of your folks up? Mayor? Oh, here. Yesterday, we had a Memorial Day service right here out front that was organized by Ken Baslick, who's here, and the Mayor's Task Force on Veterans Affairs, and it was a lovely day and a lovely event. And today, visiting with us today are members of the USS Asheville, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the USS Asheville. Carrying on a significant tradition for the city of Asheville, a fourth U.S. Navy ship named after the city was commissioned on September 28, 1991, and continues on active and commendatory, how do we say that, service to our country. The USS Asheville SSN 758 and her crew maintain the legacy of the three previous U.S. Navy ships named after the city and continue a strong bond with the citizens of the city of Asheville. The connection with the city of Asheville is manifested in the current visit to the city by Commanding Officer Commander Paul R. Pampuro, Chief of the Boat Machinist Mate Chief Robert Campbell, Logistics Specialist Second Class Tori Walker, and Machinist Mate Second Class Dalton Moore. The Asheville City Council, in session on this, the 26th day of May, 2015, warmly welcomes and recognizes the commanding officer of the USS Asheville and his three crew members to the city of Asheville. In their continuing deployments in service to our country, we wish the entire crew of the USS Asheville much success and fair winds and following seas. And if you would like to make a few comments, please do so, and then we have a few gifts for you.
Thank you, Mayor Manheimer. I'm Commander Paul Pampuro, and I get the pleasure of being the commanding officer at USS Asheville. So, not to repeat everything I said yesterday, when I travel around, there's usually two questions that I get. The first is, the submarine is in overhaul. What is your crew doing in all that time on land? Well, I have to ready the crew to go back to sea. And one of the ways that I do that is I send them to sea on other submarines. In fact, in 2014 and 2015, each deployer to Western Pacific had an Asheville sailor on board. That's over 100 Asheville sailors that deployed last year, even though the boat is being reworked. The second question that I'm often asked is, how can we help? So I'll have to push you to our man on the ground, Mr. Ken Vaslick. So we talked a little bit about things that we can do for the boat. If you please interface with him, we can work together. We have fallen in love with Asheville, and thank you for greeting us with open arms. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
We have some gifts for you, coming all this way.
You're welcome. And also, mandatory coming from Hawaii. I apologize for not having enough for everybody. Mayor, if you please take care of those.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes, thank you for coming. All right, and we have one final proclamation that's been added to the agenda. And if Timothy Sadler's here.
Just a little one.
Hi, how are you? Here, come stand right here. This is a proclamation in honor of Hemp History Week, and it wasn't on the agenda because we got a little bit of our wires mixed about whether we were doing this one at council or if you were going to use it for an event. So I will read it. Whereas industrial hemp has been grown in the U.S. since the first European settlers arrived in early 1600s, and whereas George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew hemp and actively advocated for commercial hemp production, and whereas the city of Asheville is home to the first house in America to be permitted using hempcrete, and thus has a unique role in hemp history, and whereas it is fitting and proper to recognize hemp's broad scope of potential uses with over 25,000 known applications, and whereas it is fitting and proper to celebrate industrial hemp and to encourage local and independent business, many of which feature products that incorporate hemp, and whereas industrial hemp yields on average 4 times as much paper per acre as trees do, which makes hemp paper a green alternative, whereas industrial hemp composites are being used to make electric vehicles lighter, giving them better range, and whereas industrial hemp is one of the most efficient applications to create biodiesel fuel, which helps to work towards carbon emission reduction goals. Now, therefore, I, Esther Mannheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, do hereby proclaim June 1st through 7th, 2015, as Hemp History Week in the City of Asheville, and encourage all citizens to learn about and to appreciate industrial hemp. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor Mannheimer. Industrial hemp is an incredible part of American history, and I believe firmly that if we have a great future, will be a part of our future. I have a couple of the other planners for Hemp History Week here with me, Claudia Townsend and Brian Morris. Before I hand off to Claudia, I wanted to mention that we have a handful of great events as part of Hemp History Week this year. First, we'll be at the tailgate markets downtown in West Asheville and in Oakley. And then we have a screening of the award-winning documentary that was made here by 2 filmmakers at Wedge on June 4th. And we have an end-of-the-week celebration at Bywater on Sunday, the 7th. So thank you very much, and I'm going to hand off now to Claudia.
Hello. I'm a teacher, so I brought hands-on materials to share with you. I hope that when you take these home that you think about all the applications that hemp has and how it could boost our local economy. Asheville has so many things to offer. It especially supports small farmers. Hemp could be used as a rotation crop, if nothing else. And we've got such great local food. These are samples of hemp hearts, and it's being made into, and I'm not going to say it right, but it's hemp hummus. They make that here locally in Asheville. When we go to the Wedge, we'll be drinking hemp ale. And there's something else on the tip of my tongue. Hemp ice cream. I mean, there's so many things that can be made out of hemp, and if you just focus on food, there's a whole bunch. You can just sprinkle this on a salad. It's full of protein. So I appreciate you letting us come in.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brian Morris. I'm with Canna Energy. It's an energy drink with hemp seed oil infused in it, and we are North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee representatives, master wholesalers of a product that's coming out of Denver. And we are our warehouse is in Woodfin, and we have over 200 stores carrying our product in Western North Carolina. Our seed oil that's infused comes from Canada because we can't get it here in the United States yet. Canada had a $1 billion industry for hemp alone in 2013. And so part of our agenda is to bring some of that back to the United States, or a large portion of it. The United States buys about 80% of Canadians' exports of hemp material. So we would like to see some of that brought back here, or all of it that we buy, and become an exporter ourselves. There is a decortication facility in Hope Spring, North Carolina. It's the biggest facility in the United States, on the continent, as a matter of fact, and they're producing quinaf right now. As soon as hemp is legal, they're going to rework their machine and be processing hemp, which will allow us to make hemp clothing, like this shirt and my pants, 100% hemp, made in Romania. If we can bring the textiles back here, which we're known for textiles, with our decorticating facility, Western North Carolina and North Carolina itself could be one of the leaders in the industry in the United States for industrial hemp. So that's kind of our agenda, and we'd like y'all's help with that, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Next, I have the consent agenda, and are there any questions about any item on the consent agenda? Or a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Anyone wishing to comment on the motion to approve the consent agenda? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now we're to presentations and reports, and the first is a presentation of the fiscal year 2015-16 annual operating budget, and our finance director, Barbara Whitehorn, is here to make that presentation.
Thanks, Maggie. Okay, it's good to see you all tonight. I'm Barbara Whitehorn, for those of you that didn't hear the mayor, and we're going to talk about next year's budget. Just as an introduction, our objectives in this presentation is to provide an overview. My objective is to provide an overview of the 15-16 operating and capital budget, general fund, water resources, transit services, parking services, U.S. Cellular Center, and stormwater funds. I'm sure you all recall this with my exciting little fly-ins, that we have managed to balance the budget with a few changes in our revenue model for this coming year. Our revenue strategies, the key things that we're changing are a property tax increase that we are recommending, a 1.5 cent increase per $100 of valuation, which would offset the loss of the privilege license tax that the state legislature overturned last year. The impact of this, and it's up there, an $150,000 home would be $22.50 a year. It's basically $15 per $100,000 of valuation on a home. We wanted to make sure everyone could understand exactly what the impact was by their household. And there's that little bit of revenue dropping in. Forgot I had that. Staff has been diligently working to decrease the taxpayer subsidy of programs that could be fee or admission supported in some way. And some of the things we looked at this year specifically were the Aston Park Tennis Center and the Nature Center. In the Nature Center, we're doing some new gate admission rates. The membership contribution to operations is increasing, and the total impact on that subsidy is $284,000 that it's going down. Sorry, I feel like I'm missing this about half the time. Aston Park Tennis Center, we're decreasing the subsidy there by $80,000. The largest impact as far as subsidizing versus fees is the solid waste fee increase that is proposed. It's an increase in solid waste fee of $3.50 a month to a monthly charge of $10.50. This reduces the taxpayer subsidy of the service to $1.4 million a year, and that has an impact of $42 per year per household. Any questions about that before I move on to expenditures? Okay, general fund expenditures. I think the most significant thing we've done this year is the investment in human capital with the classification and compensation study. This budget proposes a full implementation of that study, And it also includes a living wage evaluation that you all have directed staff to look at our temporary, seasonal, and part-time employees and determine which of those jobs really should be at a living wage and which are really just truly temporary positions. So that's our goal. Next, in investment in human capital, our healthcare fund performance better than expected again. We're assuming no increase in cost to the general fund for 15-16. We're continuing our increase in city contribution to other post-employment benefits and maintaining our current level transfer from the general fund to workers' comp and the liability fund. Other expenditure strategies that the staff has worked on were managed savings, where we've temporarily frozen some strategically identified positions. We're deferring some minor capital maintenance, nothing with major impacts, let's be clear on that. And one-time savings have been identified by departments. Then we have some other re-engineering and savings, which are changes to service delivery models that are saving us about $171,000. The total savings that staff was able to identify was $850,000. So the balanced general fund budget overall, our expenditures from 14-15 to 15-16 are increasing 3.6%, with total expenditures of approximately $103 million. Any questions about general fund?
One question.
Go ahead.
On the living wage compensation item, $250,000,
Yes.
you indicated that there will be some research and study by staff about how we might adapt to that, but the $250,000 is in fact included in the budget.
Yes, sir.
It's a matter of how do we organize pay scales, at different staffing levels and so on in order to implement it. Okay, I just want.
Exactly, but it is included in the budget.
Right. And the time frame for that is over the next several weeks, not necessarily.
Right, it's not like 6 months, it's like 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Shall I move on? Okay. Okay, budget planning, long-term, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that staff is continuing to evaluate city property, departmental needs and efficiencies, and we're working on interdepartmental shared services. We're trying to find as many cost-saving models and innovative approaches as we can because, as you know, that structural gap is not going away. We can either let it get worse and ignore it, or we can really focus on strategies to kind of bring those two lines, our revenue and our expenditures, together. So that's what staff is working on. Moving on to the enterprise funds. I don't like this new microphone, just telling you. I feel like I have to be right here. So if I don't have to be right here, let me know.
Yeah, when you get too close, we can hear you breathing.
That's not good. But you can't hear me if I'm back here, can you?
No, well,
How close do I have to be?
that's good.
Okay, so I'll stand here like. Okay, the water fund has seen continued stable performance. It's very well managed. We have minor rate adjustments based on the financial model, and they were approved on April 14th. We have approximately $12 million in pay-go investment in water capital improvements next year. The transit fund is under continued financial pressure. There's a 4% increase in operating costs. No service changes are budgeted, and the general fund support is increased by $90,000. And that is almost exclusively for Sunday service. And that's what that 4% is. Parking fund. God, even my P is like parking fund. Strong revenue growth, no adjustments to garage or meter rates. And we're maintaining the support to the transit fund and a capital program to discuss, additional decks and what our program's going to look like long term is being developed right now. The U.S. Cellular Fund, moderate performance in 14-15. Revenues and expenses have been adjusted down to reflect a lighter event load next year. There is no increase in general fund operating support, and the Thomas Wolfe Acoustic Study has been funded. Stormwater Fund, 5% rate increase was approved on April 14th. This includes an additional crew added for enhanced maintenance program and continuation of service and capital investment. Current CIP. Affordable housing. In 16, we have $4.5 million budgeted for affordable housing related projects. And from 2014 to 20, we have almost 10 million. 10 million. Every time I look down, you can't hear me. Public safety, police and fire, approximately $6 million budgeted in fiscal year 16. Multimodal transportation, about $6 million net of revenue offsets, which includes grants and partnerships with DOT, things like that. Economic development, it looks like it's only 400,000, but really we've got some serious offsets in there. Quality of life, about 2.1 million. Infrastructure and maintenance, about 7 million. Any questions on CIP before I go to water again? Okay. The water system refunding bonds, I don't know how much y'all have heard about this, but I'm very proud of it. We refunded the 2005 and 2007 revenue bonds for about $50 million. We have a savings of $8.2 million. And I think that should say net present value savings of something, and I apologize for that. The final maturity on these bonds is still 2033. We didn't push the date out at all in the refunding. And we are fortunate enough to be the first city in North Carolina to issue green bonds. These bonds were classified as green when they were sold, which means that the underlying projects met very specific green criteria, that they, water loss reduction, improvements to transmission and delivery, things that are good for the environment. And we're the first city, so, in North Carolina. And water projects in 15, 16, it's about 12 million, as I mentioned earlier. And now we're at the budget process calendar, which I know you all know is my final slide. So that's today, May 26th. Next, we have a public hearing, and then the budget adoption. And tonight, if I could get any direction from you, anything you'd like to see changed, and we will follow up weekly if you all have questions about the budget, because I know you just got it Friday, and we are happy to answer questions, take any direction you have, and incorporate it into the final budget, which is slated for adoption on June 23rd.
Questions, comments?
Just to be clear about there's no vote tonight on a preliminary approval of a budget. This is simply the presentation, and votes will come 2 weeks from now, and changes are possible right up to the point of the vote.
Exactly. Depending on your direction between now and then, absolutely changes can be made.
Barbara, thank you for making that really clear, and I'll be looking forward to the public hearing in a couple of weeks. One of the things that you mentioned was around transit, and that there's no plans for service improvements beyond kind of what's there for now, and we're just trying to continue funding what's there. When we implemented Sunday service at the beginning of this year, the idea was to look at that for a year, look at demand, and then reevaluate what that level of service might need to be. But it doesn't appear that there's any money budgeted should this council decide that an expansion of that service would be warranted. Could you speak to that? What kind of flexibility will we have mid-year?
Mid-year for flexibility on transit? I think council always has control over what direction staff would go with transit, and we would be happy to further evaluate. And if you want to know like what kind of response we've gotten to Sunday service, I know Ken Putnam's here.
Good evening, Ken Putnam with Transportation Department. I think the early indications, of course, we've only been in it almost 6 months now, but I think the early indications are that the ridership numbers are very solid, very good compared to the holiday service that we've had. And as we go into this first half of the new year, the second half of the calendar year, it'll give us a better idea of how we should expand. But all the emails, all the information that we're getting back have been essentially positive. I don't really know if I've even received a single negative email about this move.
Agreed. It's been a really valuable service for so many folks who are trying to get to work and get to church and get to the grocery store and just live their lives on a Sunday. And so I'm really glad that we're able to implement that. But we're all aware that in addition to any further service on Sunday, that we have received calls for later runs, for more frequencies, for more bus shelters. So as we're looking at the budget here, this council has been steadfast in maintaining that transit budget. Even through the recession, even through a hostile legislature, this council has not reduced its transit service, even in the face of all those challenges. But we're well aware that there's still lots of challenges to come. Thanks.
And you're correct. And one of the biggest challenges that we still have is the money that we get from the federal government. And it's not that, well, we don't expect that share, that big piece of money to grow significantly, but we're hearing rumblings of other folks that are trying to get their fair share of that same money. So we're facing challenges there as well. And the unfortunate thing that's been going on on the federal side is they're not really making the decisions to expand the funding or anything until the very last minute. So even like right now, when their budget year will end in September, we're hearing things that there's no movement to expand it beyond that. Now, hopefully all that will shake out, but it makes it difficult for us locally to plan a budget when we don't know what the real numbers will be until we're sometimes well into the year.
Thanks.
From a trend standpoint, ridership, are we increasing ridership? Are we staying steady?
When you look back over the last 4 to 5 years, we're hovering around the 1.5 million riders a year. Since I've been here, there's only 1 year when we crossed, I think it was 1.6 several years ago. This year, for the 10 months that we've completed, we're running 2.3% higher than last year at the same time. Hopefully now with May and June numbers still to come in, those numbers will stay at that level or go up a little bit. So I'm predicting that we'll finish out the year with an increase in ridership. I would like to cross the 1.5 million threshold, but we may not do that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
As I've asked by email, I'm still interested in seeing a breakdown of the community programs budget, what it was spent on in this last year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no hurry, but
I think I understand better the question
got
you're
more.
asking, so no problem at all.
right.
And this is just for next year, but I would really like to see that at this time we compare not only the projected budget to last year's budget, but to our estimate for where we're going to land at the end of the year.
Would you like to have that in the budget document itself? Because we can absolutely do that.
It would help me,
Next year.
because I just think it's a more relevant comparison to say, well, where do we think we're going to finish the year compared to the budget? Because otherwise,
We can add that to the budget document next
that'd
year.
be great.
Appreciate, if I could add, I appreciate you bringing it up in the way that you did that, because we were talking about reformatting the budget to add a fifth column. In addition to providing 2 actuals and then the adopted budget, then you would have an estimate column to go next between it, the adopted and the proposed budget. So you would be able to readily make that. Anecdotally, we don't have any stats on this, but half the budgets, municipal budgets, go one way or another, and it's acceptable accounting standards to do it either way. But if, given this lead time, I believe we can build that into our presentation package next year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mayor?
Oh,
All right.
wait.
Yeah,
Oh, you have something?
just making sure there's room for everybody. I didn't want to take up all the air in the room. One of the things I'm really glad to see is our responding to the compensation study. I think that getting our salaries right, especially for our public safety workers, is one of my highest priorities in this budget this year. And walking the talk on our living wage is also something that I'm glad to hear is included in there, and we can get the rest of the way there on making sure that happens. I did want to ask about, in the housing budget, there was I believe it was 750,000 that was listed for this year. I was just, there's some EDCIP, there's some Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I was just wondering if you could clarify those numbers.
Sure. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund this year got $500,000, and the CIP money there was $500,000. Next year was intended to be 500 and 500 again. However, of the CIP money, 250,000 remained unspent, so it will be 500,000 and 750.
And of that EDCIP, 750,000, how much of that is already programmed?
Of the 750, maybe. Do you know
I
that?
believe another way to ask that question is, do we have identified projects that will eat up 500,000 already programmed? And Barbara, that's the programming that we have for that is the relocation of the parks maintenance facility. So I think what we want to do is go back and analyze what our current estimate is for that project and see if there's some leeway to reduce the EDCIP, the Economic Development Capital Improvement Program dollars from 500,000. If we have, for example, if we need, by last count, $300,000 to finish that project out to go with previous year funding, then you would have the flexibility to program that the net difference between 500 and 300, the 200,000 for either the trust fund or other housing projects.
So rather than at this point, trying to identify what that next project might be, similar to parks maintenance, it would be possible to shift some of those dollars directly into housing trust fund and get some of that allocated in this coming budget year?
We believe so. Can we bring that back to you in a couple of weeks to just verify that I'm giving you the correct answer to your question and tell you what your flexibility is to reprogram that CIP money?
That'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
While I have the microphone, let me just add that based upon council interest, we should come back in 2 weeks, Barbara, with further detail on the fund balance. And I believe the council interest there is in seeing what the five-year trend is. I specifically would like to see what we presented to the bond rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody, and Fitch, and how we've been trending since there, through and including the estimate for the current year, and then what we would be programming going forward, and so that we can see a continuous, at least a 5-year trend.
Yes, I've got a 10-year, actually, so I'll get it out tomorrow to everybody.
Great.
Okay. Anything else?
Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Oh, Barbara, we have, the next item is financial report. Will you be doing that or something?
That's just the report, unless y'all have questions.
Information only, okay.
I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
In that third quarter report, Barbara, you indicate that the general fund revenues are supposed to exceed about 1.1 million, and also note that expenditures are also supposed to be about 1.1 million less than predicted, a total of about 2.2 million savings. Given that we're looking at a consideration of a tax increase of 1.5 million, does this give you reason to believe that that may not be necessary?
No, what that kind of saves us from is using that allocation of fund balance that we included in the budget last year. We had a $2 million allocation of fund balance for last year's budget. Because of the savings and the increases in revenue, we don't have to draw down fund balance, which was the hope. And normally when you use an allocation of fund balance like that, one reason to do so is because you're unsure of revenues and you don't necessarily feel that cuts are necessary yet. And last year was a perfect example with us coming out of the recession and we didn't know where revenues were going to land. We felt like they were likely to be high enough. We thought we could find efficiencies, But in order to fill that budget gap, we used that allocation of fund balance because we knew we could afford it if we had to, with the hope that revenues and savings would be good enough not to use it. So essentially what we've done is we've broken even plus a little bit instead of using that fund balance.
And so that was last year, and you're predicting the same thing again this year?
We're not predicting, we're not allocating fund balance. We think we have a better handle on where revenues are now, so we're making our forecasts based on what we've seen this year, which has been significantly different, obviously, than the recession. So now we feel like our revenue trends are more well established, and we can say, okay, this is where we expect to be with revenues, and feel fairly certain of that. We really scrubbed expenditures and worked hard to find those efficiencies, so we feel like those expenditure numbers are really solid. So I think at this point, when we're saying we recommend this tax increase, it's because we've gone through everything and we're very comfortable that our forecast for next year is accurate.
Okay, I guess I just need a little bit of help on this one here. So we're predicting between reduced expenditures and increased revenues that there'll be a plus of about 2.2 million. Is that right?
Actually, because we had allocated 2 million in fund balance, the increase to fund balance would be the amount over 2 million will actually increase fund balance. Does that make sense? It's like fund balance was at, say it was at 10 million. It was higher than that, but say. And then we took 2 million out. That 2 million, we're putting it back in and we're adding a little bit.
Okay, so I guess what you're saying then is that by putting that back in, there's still it's still necessary to raise another $1.5 million?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
You could add to that, of course, that the reason we need that money is because the state has decided not to tax Walmart and is happy to pass the costs along to Asheville residents. That's the effect of taking away that professional license fee that we used to collect. Big businesses are no longer carrying their weight.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, next under presentation and reports is the National Citizen Survey results, and our own Dawa Hitch is here. Hold on, there's a mass exodus happening.
That's probably related to the budget.
Don't feel bad.
Well, good evening,
Yeah, don't feel
Mayor
bad.
and Council. My name's Dawa Hitch, and I serve as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city. And tonight, I'm going to give just a brief, high-level overview of the results from the National Citizen Survey. So this year, we worked with the National Research Center, Inc. They are an organization that provides, in collaboration with ICMA, citizen surveys across the country. The last time the city of Asheville completed one of those with its residents was in 2008. So you may wonder why survey in the first place. Well, in the high quality of life focus area, City Council outlined 5 goals, and one of those goals was to continue to develop City Council communications and partnerships with citizens, community leaders, the media, and elected officials. Administering a citizen survey was one of the action steps identified to achieve that goal. And as I shared earlier, the National Citizen Survey gave us the opportunity to both look at trends and responses from 2008 until compared to now, 2015. And the organization that administers the National Citizen Survey has a very large database so that we can benchmark results from the survey against cities across the United States. So before I get too deep into some of the details of the survey, I just want to make sure everybody understands that there's a lot of information that was gleaned from this survey, and there are a lot of reports associated with it. And all of those are available online. They're online right now. If you go to the front page of the city's website, under government, you can get to the open government page, and they're all listed there. So again, tonight's is just going to be a high-level overview. So looking at the methodology, I won't spend a whole lot of time here unless there are any questions, but there were 1,200 surveys that were sent out across the city. 337 were there were responses from 337 households. The response rate was 29%, and 25 to 40% is normal. So down to the confidence interval, there was a 95% confidence interval with this survey, and just to put that in plain language, that means that any given response, the percentage of positive responses would have been 5 percentage points plus or minus, and we'll get a little bit more into what those responses are when we look a little bit deeper into the survey. One other item I wanted to make sure folks understood are out there. If you're interested in all of the details, there were some subgroup comparisons that were also included, and those were both geographic and demographic. While this presentation does not go into the subgroup comparisons, I thought it was worth mentioning, and to give a little more detail, the geographic subgroup comparisons were related to zip codes, and the demographic information included number of years in Asheville, whether the respondent rented or owned, annual household income, and age. All surveys were completed in English, although a Spanish language survey was made available online. And finally, the sampling method was designed to closely mirror the overall housing density here in the city, and that included oversampling of multifamily housing units, since the survey administrators have found that residents of multifamily housing typically respond to surveys at a lower rate than residents of single-family homes. So there's a real effort made to make sure that we were reaching across the city and that it was a good representative sample. Now, on to some of those results. So again, this is going to be high level. There are 3 pillars of community that the National Research Center kind of grouped all of their responses into. And we're going to go over those, we're going to go through those 3 main pillars and look a little bit more in depth than the governance one, which is the one that really gets down to what our operations are. So community characteristics, in other words, that might be what makes a community livable, attractive, and a place where people want to be. So in responding to Asheville as a place to live, there was a 89% positive response, and that's the pie chart there at the top of the, on the top of the slide. And that was similar to benchmark cities across the country. The information in the bottom chart digs a little bit deeper into the data and shows how Asheville compares against other benchmark cities. So you can see there areas where Asheville was higher than the benchmark are the ones that are in white. So that would be overall image and place to retire. Those percentage points, again, are the percentage of positive responses. So whether it was excellent or good, those were grouped together to give an idea and to be able to compare to the benchmark. Similar to other cities were the quality of life in my neighborhood, Asheville is a place to raise children, and the overall appearance of Asheville. And again, that's 86, 78, and 73% positive, respectively. So that's community characteristics. That's kind of how people feel about the city of Asheville and their experience with it as a place to live. Now we're moving on to governance, and that's the second pillar within their model. So this pillar relates to how well government meets the needs and expectations of its residents. So if we're looking broad at one of the general categories of questions that they asked, when we're looking at overall quality of city services, the response was 63% positive, and that again is similar to benchmark cities across the country. There's the governance slide. So again, that's a 63% positive response. There were a lot more, but there are a ton of items in this category. There are about 30 individual services that were evaluated. So to make this go a little bit faster tonight and to give a good overview, what I did was take the take the areas where there was the greatest percent change, both in a positive and negative direction. So that, again, that's the trending data from 2008 to 2015. What people in the city of Asheville, how their opinions changed about some of these different items. So just to walk through these real quickly, in case they're hard to see, areas where we were similar to other benchmark cities were in the overall direction of the city, welcoming of citizen involvement and emergency preparedness. Areas where we were lower than benchmark were in bus or transit service, traffic enforcement, land use planning and zoning, customer service, and street repair. Again, those benchmarks are just a bit of a snapshot comparing us to other cities. And so these next tables that we're going to walk through talk a little bit more about what those trends are in Asheville. And you can see that in some circumstances, even in areas where we came in lower, the trend in Asheville has been moving up. So looking at bus or transit service, you've got the percentage of positive responses in 2008 and 2015 in this column. There's been a 27% decline between that 45% and 33% positive response. So the percent change between those two responses is 27%. And again, that's lower than benchmarks across the country. Looking at street repair, the next highest percent change, there was a 26% decrease between the responses in 2008 and 2015. And again, that is also lower than benchmark. The third is traffic enforcement, and the percent change between the responses was 19%, and that one also was lower than benchmark. So covering the ones where there was an increase, the first was emergency preparedness. So there was a 40% change in a positive direction for emergency preparedness, and that's similar. So that's the Asheville trend. And when you're looking at benchmark, where the response in 2015 is about similar. Natural area preservation, there was a 57% increase in positive responses between 2008 and 2015. So when you look at the 2015 benchmark, you'll see similar, but people's perception in Asheville increased 57%. And then land use planning and zoning, there was a 94% increase in positive responses between 08 and 15. And that was one of the areas where if you look at the benchmark's lower, looking at other cities across the country, but when you look at Asheville's perception of how things are improving, there's significant improvement according to the responses. So those are some of the trends, and I thought it was important to pull those out because that's the real meat of the operation of what the operations of the city are, so that's the on-the-ground work, the services that are being provided to the residents. Now we're moving to the third pillar, and that's participation. So we've talked about community characteristics, kind of what the world looks like around us. We've talked about the governments, the services that are provided to the residents of the city, and finally participation, knowing that all of those things have to work in coordination to make a place experience a high quality of life. In this area, the sense of community, when people were responding to that question, there was 66% of the responses were positive, and I've highlighted some of the areas again, and these are pulled from the livability report. And before I wrap up this presentation, I'll make sure I talk about what that is and again where that can be found. So 80% of the folks that responded to the survey responded positively that they would recommend Asheville, and that's similar to other communities. Remain in Asheville, that was 83%. Contacted Asheville employees, that was similar to other communities, but only 38% of the people that responded acknowledged that they had contacted Asheville employees or noted that they had contacted Asheville employees. Looking at areas where Asheville is higher than benchmark, we've got a lot of folks in our community that volunteer, and that kind of set us apart from some of the other benchmark communities. in the survey. And then also the number of people that work in Asheville, that was higher than benchmark. So there are others, if you're looking at cities in the benchmark database, more people in the city of Asheville actually work in the city of Asheville as opposed to work in another neighboring city. The last one, and there are a number of these for anybody that's interested in digging a little bit deeper into the data, there are a lot of questions about, how often do you use transit, or how often do you bicycle or walk instead of use public transportation. So we drew this one out, and that's using public transportation instead of driving. So Asheville is lower than benchmark in that area, with 17% of the respondents saying that they took advantage of that opportunity. All right, now we're moving on. So there were 17 total questions in the survey. 13 of those were ones that other cities also asked, so that those are the ones that are available to benchmark against. We also asked some questions that we asked in 2008, but they were more open-ended. So this question kind of captures, again, without being prompted, what residents in the city of Asheville believe to be important as far as investments go. And so you can see there were a lot of items that folks believed were important across the board. And right up there together are a number, and that's environmental protection, sustainability. The light blue area they were denoted as essential, and then the darker blue area is where they were noted as very important. And again, just like the positive response items that we were talking about earlier, these percentages have to do with those top two portions. Essential are very important.
Dawa, you said that these were at open-ended questions, so there weren't suggestions?
No, there were suggestions. All of the items that you see before you here on the left-hand side, they were listed, and the question was, rate these as essential, very important, or not on down the line. There was one open-ended question, and that said, what do you think the greatest challenge is that Asheville will face in the coming years? And that information nearly reflects this information here, but without the differentiation between essential and very important.
Dawa, were people able to, did they rank these 1 to 10, or were they just able to say it's very important?
I'll read exactly what the question was, just so we're all on the same page. Okay, so the exact question was, please indicate how important, if at all, each of the following investments is for the city of Asheville. And then the choices there were essential, very important, somewhat important, not at all important, and don't know.
So it didn't say rank your first choice, second choice. So
it did
rank all of them as
very
essential.
Important. You could, or essential. You could. All right. Any other questions about this? This question about city investments and how those percentages?
Just one, Dawa. So there were how many choices in this list? Does this reflect all the choices?
Yes, these are all of the items that were listed for people to respond to. All right. Now, we talked about the pillars, and those pillars, again, were the three areas that kind of that comprehensively make up a resident's experience in a city. Within each of those pillars, these different facets were included. So I wanted to make sure we covered this, and this again kind of deals with the quality of life. So the green, mobility, when you look at all of the different questions that would fit within that subject heading, that facet, the City of Asheville responses were lower than benchmark. All of the others were similar. All of these other facets were similar. And then based on the table that you just looked at, that was one of the contributing factors to the two that have stars. And the analysis of those survey results suggests that the natural environment and economy are the two things that residents in the city of Asheville believe should get the most attention, or are the most important. That's probably a better way to say, are most important to the residents of the city of Asheville. So it combined, those two areas combined some of those different subjects that we pulled out and identified for people to respond to.
Mobility means literally moving from one place to another.
Yes, so that could be streets, sidewalks, bike lanes, greenways, traffic signal timing. I mean, anything that gets you from point A to point B would be included in that category. All right, so next steps. City Council has strategic goals, and a number of the areas that were identified that were either lower than benchmark, or areas where there were increases or specifically decreases in positive responses, are areas that have been identified in Council's current strategic plan. So just noting that that's an important place where there's vision and there's goals that are established, and recognizing that a lot of the results that we saw were aligned with what is currently in Council's strategic goal. An example of that would be in the mobility area. There's Sunday service that's been implemented, and then we're also in the middle of the Asheville in Motion public engagement process that will look at multimodal transportation and establishing goals and priorities there. The second step is going to be to share this information with boards and commissions. So making sure that the boards and commissions have more detailed information in all of these areas, and that they each have the time to ask questions and make sure that they've got all of the information that's available for them in determining policy advice to you all. And then the third step is in the realm of management strategies, and one of those is the budget. And we heard tonight that there are some of the items that have been addressed here are addressed in the manager's proposed budget. Just an example there is that street and sidewalk repair are now part of the CIP budget, and the recommendation is 1.1 million in that area, I believe. So if you think back to, we saw that street repair was an area where there was some concern, or that the responses weren't as positive, that kind of information is reflected in the budget. Also, I think there are 6 greenway projects that are going on now, and that was another area where we were lower than benchmark. So that concludes my presentation. I just want to remind everybody again that all of this information, and there is a lot, it's available online. This shows you how to get there. If you go to the front page of the city's website under government, and pull down that drop-down box, and then you'll find open government, and that'll take you directly to the page where all of the reports can be accessed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you. All right, last under presentation and reports is the legislative update. And I'll do that quickly. The big news from the legislature, which is still in session right now, is that the House passed its version of the budget, and it's now over to the Senate, and the Senate will begin its work. Well, it's already begun its work, but it'll begin the hearing process tomorrow. In the House budget, there were many, many things, but particular to cities, we saw the film tax credit included in there to the tune of $40 million a year. This is a controversial tax credit that affects Asheville to some extent, and Wilmington and some other cities to a lesser extent. There also was included in the House version a tiered historic preservation tax credit. This is another tax credit that was eliminated last year, very controversial, another tax credit that's important to Asheville because of our high percentage of older buildings in this area. Also, the renewable energy tax credit was extended for 2 years. This is also a very controversial tax credit being discussed in Raleigh. There was some funding for JDIG, which is the grant money for business recruiting. economic development. I don't know to what extent the JDIG funds were renewed, but I think there's concern that they were not fully renewed. And the House budget does not include any language regarding sales tax redistribution, which is a concept being examined in the legislature right now in independent bills, and we know that the Senate is interested in looking at a sales tax reallocation or redistribution that is of great concern to Asheville and Buncombe County, and so we're watching that closely. So the Senate will begin their work. They are not keen on any of these tax credits, so we imagine there'll definitely be some differences between the House version and the Senate version, which means they will go to committee to work out their differences. And then finally, and interestingly, the graffiti bill that didn't get any traction last year has now passed second reading in the Senate, and it was a House bill, so it already passed over from the House. So we might actually see an increased punishment for graffiti. There are, of course, other things going on in the legislature as well, but I just wanted to mention a few things, and I think we'll know more in the coming weeks. Also, just to remind everyone, Asheville's water lawsuit is still pending at the Court of Appeals, and oral argument will be heard in that case next week. And if anybody wants to come, it's free and open to the public to go watch oral argument. I know I plan to be there, and others may as well. And then it will be some time before the Court of Appeals gives us a decision in that case. All right, that is the legislative update. I don't know if anyone has anything they want to mention. Okay.
Mayor, Councilman Smith and I just had a very brief conversation outside, though. But we both talked about the fact that we're both small business people, and we did receive our privilege license bill this year.
From the state.
From the state.
So did I, yes.
And so the question is, if it was relieved from, if we still got the bill, who didn't have to get the bill?
Well, we have to distinguish. There's a local privilege tax, or was a local privilege tax. They did not eliminate the state privilege tax. That is a tax paid to the state. You pay it as a realtor. I pay it as a lawyer. You pay it as well. So no, they did not eliminate their privilege tax. The irony was not lost on me either.
Yes.
Okay. That concludes the presentations and reports. Next, we have our public hearings agenda, and we do need a motion to continue item E, which is the Oak Hill Drive project. That needs to be continued. Do we have a date certain, Maggie, that we're, I'm sorry, June 9th, yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to continue item E on the public hearings agenda to June 9th. Anyone wishing to comment on that motion? No? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, the first item is a public hearing to consider an amendment to a previously approved conditional zoning from Urban Place District conditional zoning to Urban Place District conditional zoning to amend a previously approved mixed-use development project located at 146 Robert Street. And I have Jessica Bernstein here to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public. So as was stated, this is an amendment to a previously approved conditional zoning that council heard and approved back in 2013. The project, we'll get there, but I think everyone's familiar with the site. The project site is 2 parcels with a combined area of 3.26 acres, and it's in the River Arts District. It's the old former Dave Steele site. When it does pop up, you'll see on the aerial, it's a little outdated. It still shows those Dave Steele facilities, but as most folks are aware, the site's largely vacant at this point. And then there's also a small parcel across the street on Roberts that is a part of this proposal as well. So the project itself has primary frontage on Robert Street and Clingman Avenue Extension, and then a small portion of frontage along Park Avenue North. It's at the top of the site.
Do you think it's going? Usually it gives us a little, gives us. We're going to have to remember our warm-up time here.
So the site is now currently zoned, conditionally zoned for urban place, as it was in 2013, and this is an amendment to that previous approval. So I'll just go through some of the changes for you. There were changes to the mix of uses. Urban place is intended to be a high-intensity, high-density, mixed-use zoning district. And the applicant has come back with an increase, a 16% increase to the number of residential units, up to 243. Previously, it was for 209. Is there anything I can do? The retail, though, did decrease. So while we're gaining more residential, the retail and office uses did decrease. 55% decrease in the retail spaces, as well as a 26% decrease in office. As far as the access, how the site would be accessed is not changed. Here we go. This is just to orient everyone to the site. The primary parcel, this is Robert Street, this is Clingman Avenue Extension. As you can see, this is just a site plan from the previous approval in 2013. Here's Robert Street, Clingman Avenue Extension. And this is a less pretty site plan, but showing the current proposal. Robert Street, Clingman Avenue Extension. So as I mentioned, there's an increase to residential, decrease to retail and office spaces. The access is the same in both plans. There's one driveway from Roberts as well as one driveway from Clingman Avenue, so that hasn't changed. The building height is similar. There's 5 levels with 2 levels of parking below. And from Roberts Street, there's no visual of the parking. The change on Clingman Avenue is that for a stretch of that, you will see a bit of the parking deck. Really, you would see it from the rear, from Park Avenue North, but that's not really that's a dead-end street. It's not an active corridor, so there's not a lot of visual on that parking structure that's included. The building size has changed. As you can see, the previous plan, it's still on a base of parking structure below, but in the previous plan, as the buildings came up, it looked a little bit more like 7 separate structures above ground, and now it's really going to function and look as one building. There's a slight increase in the number of parking spaces, and there's a change to the pedestrian activity, mostly along Clingman Avenue Extension, and that goes in with the design with the parking deck. There are new sidewalks, as in the previous approval, new sidewalks on all frontages. There's a couple of locations where there's decreased sidewalk width from the urban place standard, and that's detailed out in in the staff report under the conditions, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But just to talk a little bit about the parking, there's surface parking across the street on Robert Street, delineation of on-street parking along Robert Street, and then the parking spaces in the garage. There's landscape and open space required in urban place, and that's all shown compliant on the plans with the exception in the conditions. As far as the conditions, these are areas where the proposal deviates from what's spelled out in the urban place zoning district, and we've got a few here. The first is density. In urban place, while it is a high-density district, it's set at 62 units per acre. And with this increase, the applicant's asking for 75 units per acre. The staff is supportive of that as a way to get more residential activity on the site. There is a condition related to building size. As I mentioned, the previous approval this is a condition that was in that previous approval, but it's just a little bit different. Technically, it is still one building, even in 2013, although it looked a little different as the buildings came up. They looked a little bit more separate. So this is still just one building that exceeds the footprint size and the gross floor area that we have spelled out in the urban place district. And the applicant is intending to use architecture to kind of break up the massing of that structure. But the proposal is 65% above the maximum footprint for the district and 111% above the maximum gross floor area for the district. But again, with that sort of breaking up of the massing and some architectural treatment and some pedestrian activity areas along the sidewalks, widened sidewalks, outdoor dining, that will kind of break up the massing of the building. Sidewalks, I mentioned, the minimum, or excuse me, the minimum for the zoning district is 10 feet. And there are a couple of instances where that is not met. Here along Clingman Ave, there's a few areas where the sidewalk gets down to 7.5 feet. And then on the opposite side of Robert Street, gets down to about 6.5 feet. But on the project side where we see the most activity with retail spaces, that sidewalk does meet the minimum of 10 feet. It was widened, and there's areas where it's significantly more, as well as areas along Clingman Avenue. Well, we get down to a couple of lower points. There are areas where it is much wider. There's a condition on setback. The maximum front setback in this zoning district is 15 feet, and there's an area just here in this corner where it exceeds 15 feet. There's going to be a lot of pedestrian activity there. It's adjacent to a trolley stop. There's outdoor dining, so staff was supportive of that additional setback. The last two conditions that are detailed have to do with the design of the building. We've got requirements because it is intended to be a really active zoning district at the street level for the pedestrian. There are requirements for entrances every 60 feet, pedestrian entrances, and then also for a certain percentage of fenestration and windows at the ground level. And there are a couple spots that don't meet this. This is really not going to be that easy to see, but so this rendering is Robert Street, and again, this is where most of the retail and commercial activity is. There's one area where a grocery store is planned for that space, and there's the distance between the entrances does exceed 60 feet. And so that is technically, that is a condition that council would have to grant. The fenestration is fine and does comply along Robert Street. This is Clingman Avenue extension. So the previous approval in 2013 had live workspaces and some additional retail along Clingman Avenue extension. So that's been really eliminated and for the most part. And Clingman Avenue has more residential with brownstone type units. This is the area that has more like a brownstone configuration with stoops that would go up to the individual units. So there are some deviations between the distance between the entrances. They're a little bit further than 60 feet, but they're private entrances. They're not really intended to be public entrances into a lobby or a retail space. So it still will have some activity with those stoops and the steps and the individual entrances. Then as we get past that, and this is heading down towards Robert Street, there's a long stretch here where the project is out of compliance with fenestration and entrances. It's just a bit of a solid wall there before you get to the driveway, the vehicular access point on Clingman Avenue. And then heading away from that driveway down towards Robert Street, we've got a stretch where that's parking structure behind the building wall. And so there will be, it's not active spaces, there'll be openings into the parking deck. This has been, so it's technically not compliant with the code. This was discussed and detailed in your report with the River District Design Review Committee, and they had some suggestions that have been incorporated into staff's recommendation on some creative ways to address those areas where we don't have compliance with the activity that we would see from entrances or from windows, and that's the use of public art. Some suggestions were community bulletin board, more street furniture, bike racks, some interest in screening or paneling, just creative solutions, especially being in this location in the River Arts District, some creative artistic solutions for creating activity, the sense of activity while there's not going to be a retail space behind the building. those are the conditions. And just briefly, staff is still supportive of the request. It's an appropriate location for this type of development. It does meet with the city's goals and objectives. You'll see in the next public hearing after this, the discussion on affordable units and workforce housing. So staff has taken this amendment through the TRC, the River District Design Committee, the full Riverfront Redevelopment Commission. We've met with representatives from the RADBA, the River Arts District Business Association, with concerns about parking and the construction impact. But the project has been recommended by the city's committees and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Staff does recommend approval with conditions that have been listed in the staff report and in the B1 list. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I just sort of breezed through a lot of technical information.
Does anyone have any questions before we hear from the applicant? It was very thorough.
Thank you.
All right, does the applicant wish to speak, or representative of the applicant?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. They asked me to put this up because they think it looks a little better. Let's see. It's white instead of dark, so I think you'll be able to see it. My name is Lou Bissett. I'm representing Delphi Capital tonight. I also have with me the developer, Harry Pelos, Robin Raines from Row House, and Matt Sprouse from SiteWorks. They'll be here to answer any questions that you may have on this reprogramming of this project. I'm going to be very brief because I know you've been dealing with this for a long time. It's a very complex project with 250 residential units, well over 300 parking spaces, retail, office. But I think we all understand how important it is to the redevelopment of our River Arts District. In my estimation, it's going to be a key to that redevelopment. There have been some changes. Jessica's outlined those for you. They'll be here to answer any specific questions. The developer has agreed to all of the conditions in the amendment to the conditional zoning, which is this public hearing. There is one area that we're going to discuss, and I don't know whether that we would like to have clarified. It's actually a part of both, but it may well be more a part of the incentive grant.
Well, I think it's a part of this too. This is going to be an ordinance.
Okay.
So whatever these conditions say,
Okay.
There's no wiggle room later.
Okay. Well, you know, the developer has agreed to the affordable housing component, 5%. With this increase in the number of units, it increases the affordable housing allocation by 1 apartment. The remainder is to be initially workforce housing, although there has been discussion, and it's been in all of, as I understand it, in all of the pro formas that have been provided to Jeff, and that is in the workforce housing component. We would like we very much need for our financing that there be an up to 3% increase in the workforce housing allocation rents per year. That's not to say that this is ever going to be used. I was looking today at the 2015 calculations, but for our financing, we need that to be a part of this approval. So with that, I will sit down and see if you have any questions. I think we're all here to be able to answer those. Thank you.
Are there any questions? You look confused.
Well, so where's that written? I mean, I'd just like the...
It's not written.
Oh.
That's what we would like to have in here. It's been a part of our discussions with the city all along. We are not asking for that potential to increase the rents in the affordable housing component, only in the workforce housing component. Affordable housing maximums, as I understand it, are are calculated by HUD each year, and so we will comply with that. Workforce housing maximums, I think, are calculated by the city. So we really need that to be a part of our financing.
I was hoping maybe, so if I understand, we have a workforce housing rate for this year. And I don't know what the year-over-year natural growth of it is. I mean, obviously it goes up every year by some percentage. I don't know if Jeff has any insight, I know he's here, about the historic trend of workforce housing prices.
We don't either, and maybe Jeff does know, but we're concerned that, in a period of economic decline, that might not increase every year.
So what you're saying is you need the flexibility to increase workforce housing rents by 3%, even if
No more than
growth
3%.
and no more than 3%, even if the growth. Hold on, Harry. Let's do.
Yeah, let's let Jeff.
I mean, even if the growth in workforce rates is 2%, or if it's 4%. I mean, we don't know. So I don't, Jeff. Maybe you can speak to that.
Jeff,
give us some context.
Thank you, Mayor. So as I've discussed this project with Harry Pelos, the developer, and looked at the realities of finance attainment for this project, it seemed even in a tax credit project, most developers will use a standard 3% increase in rents to carry forward, assuming a rise in costs for those developments. And Mr. Pelos has done the same in his pro formas to account for the potential of rising costs over time. This is not to say that he would increase those rents 3% on an annual basis, but the ability to do so is an essential element of obtaining the financing for the project. Now, I note that we're working with on the land use incentive grant and other ways to try to structure this. Statute, as our city attorney has pointed out, is very clear about the affordable housing rents. And those affordable housing rents, the way we calculate it is based upon HUD's definition, and statute uses the same, of 80% of median income. And so our 30% of that 80% of median income caps by statute what can be charged in terms of the affordable rents. When it comes to workforce, however, we define that. Workforce is not a term defined by HUD. It's not a term defined by the state of North Carolina. Frankly, every place tends to define it themselves. Some places define it up to 150% of median income for workforce. We've chosen 120%. So in terms of looking at the potential for increasing rents to meet rising costs, it seemed, and now I go over to the land use incentive grant for just a second, but it's relevant for both of these. I see that giving the developer the potential to increase those rents to meet rising costs within that workforce category is a reasonable approach to looking at this pro forma and this project.
Can you remind us what those rates are?
Yes. In fact, I don't have them to display for you, but I do have them to talk about with you. So those workforce rents right now, if we were to look at rents at 120% of median income, Jessica was so kind to provide that, would be, as I hope we're in agreement here, that the workforce rents is for a one-bedroom unit, including utilities, $1,344 per month. For a two-bedroom unit, $1,513. That's inclusive of utilities. So energy efficient, highly efficient, locationally efficient units will obviously be more affordable in many ways for people to live in. But those are the workforce rents that have been established as the place where these rents, at least at initiation, cannot exceed. I will say that the developers' rents in the pro formas that I've seen were below those workforce rents upon initiation.
That was my question. If I recalled, this development, the numbers that we originally got shown, he was substantially below the 120%.
That is correct.
I want to know what the new condition is going to say, because the workforce word is no longer relevant if it's, except for the first year. Because they can go up 3% regardless of whether the workforce rate is exceeded, if you will. So the word workforce in this condition only has any meaning in year one. So I guess I would ask Mr. Bissett or Jeff to explain, because we've got to be able to write this into our condition, what they are proposing. Workforce year one for 95% with a 3%, potential 3% increase each year after? Oh.
Year one, they would certainly be below the workforce maximum. In year two, he would have the ability to increase the rent up to 3%.
And it says here for a period of 10 years was the first proposal for the workforce, but
Yes.
now it's just forevermore, 3% every year if he starts at workforce?
I think it's after 10 years that the condition would end.
So so 3% for every year for 9 years, and then thereafter, whatever they want.
right.
Okay. I mean, I just want council to understand what the proposal is so that they can give it proper consideration.
Good. And it's, yes.
So it's 3% per year up to the workforce maximum?
No.
No, it can go beyond.
The only workforce, at or below workforce maximum in year one. Thereafter, an increase of 3% each year up to year 10, at which point there would be no restriction.
But to clarify, it's 3% over year one. So if Asheville decided the workforce rate went up 5%, they'd be held at the lower 3% over year one. Gwen's shaking her head, but that's how I understand the conditions.
I think it's 3% each year for each year thereafter.
So it's 3% over the current rate. It's not 3% over the maximum workforce housing. That's my question.
This is an underwriting issue.
We're clear on why you need it. We're trying to figure out what it is you want.
Baseline of the 2015, as Jeff knows, baseline workforce housing, year one, compounded 3% per year for 10 years.
So it would be 3%. So if you went up 3% in year two, then you could go up 3% from the increased rate each year thereafter. Okay.
Hang on, I'm not sure we're stating it two different ways. To be clear, Harry, are we talking about whatever your first year rent rates are, you would increase your rent rate by no more than 3% every year, regardless of where the workforce maximum.
We're starting with the 2015 baseline of workforce housing and low-income housing. You know, the 5% that stays on the side, we don't care what happens there. We're getting tax abatements for that to subsidize that over 10 years. So workforce housing, 2015, compounded 3% add, and it's up to if the market will bear it. If it will not, then it won't go up that high.
And we're still talking about two things. My question is simple.
Right.
The rent rates you will charge in year one will be some amount that will not necessarily match our workforce rate. Right? Are you with me? And you've shown pro formas to our staff suggesting you're going to charge significantly less than the workforce rate. Is what you're saying is you're going to only go up no more than 3% on your rate, or that you can increase up to 3% above our starting workforce rate?
The starting workforce rate is what our underwriting is.
So really, I mean, what I want council to see here is that if indeed the project starts out at, let's just say,
That far right column.
yeah.
13.
1267. It's a good one-bedroom rate.
Okay, 1267. Let's just say you start out at 1100.
Right.
The next year, 1267 increases by 3%. But you could increase your rate all the way up to that. See,
That's our
rates could actually increase significantly.
That's our ceiling. And just so you guys know, last 2 years, Buncombe County's been 4% annually, and it's on track for 5% this year. So what we're doing is restricting our income abilities for the next decade. We're putting a cap on how far we can go despite the market in return for the Luigi incentives.
And that rate is at or below that workforce number, or are you going to pick a rate below that?
Workforce housing number at 3% compounded annually.
Okay, the maximum, I just want council to understand that regardless of his pro forma, what he's proposing is that maximum number, which is your decision.
And I just got to ask, Harry, is your underwriter, your lender, telling you that you need the latitude to increase your rent rates by 3% per year?
We have to.
No,
yes.
Okay, so
yes. And costs will be that or higher.
So we're you know, Alan just said that your rent rates, the pro formas you've shown, show you starting significantly lower than our workforce.
When we started this about 2 years ago, we were looking at a $35 million, $38 million project. It's over $55 million.
Okay.
I mean, the costs have literally almost doubled. But we honor our agreements on this side of the table, and we just want to move forward with the additional units, less retail, more. We wrap the retail around Klinkman Extension, so you do have some retail presence there, and we just want to. I have presented to the underwriters our agreements that we thought we had with the city staff. We just want to make sure that happens, get it documented, get the project financed. We can start construction this December. Without any of these pieces, it does not underwrite. Okay?
Alan, could you clarify what you said about, you made reference to
Alan or Jeff?
Alan Glines. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Jeff, you said it.
They
You guys look a lot alike there. Although Alan's beard needs to get a little bigger.
There you go.
Jeff, you made a comment that it's some type of norm that in tax credit financing arrangements that a 3% increase provision over a threshold like this is
pro forma, that's correct.
So would staff, I mean, is staff recommending acceptance of this condition, this provision here? I mean, it's not in the package we read, but is that where staff is in recommending that this be a part?
I think that if council's goal in part is to see this project built, that yes, that appears to be a necessary element in order to have this project built.
And can you confirm that median income has gone up 5% or is on track to go up 5% in Buncombe County
No,
this year?
no.
Okay. Oh, I thought you were saying that the target.
Yeah, I thought.
Yeah.
No, median income is increasing slightly every year, but nowhere near at 5% rates.
So if there were so if we started at 1344 and did a 3% increase each year for 9 years, you end up at 1707 for a one bedroom. Would fall within that. That's where that could land if the developer were to max that out year over year.
And, you know, perspective is that historically the rate of inflation, CPI, has been something like 3% over many decades, not the past 6 or 8 years. Another perspective is that land values in Asheville currently are increasing at a rate greater than 3%. So, I mean, if you look at history, 3% is not an unreasonable rate of
To limit
increase.
ourselves, the issue is underwriting a unknown, okay, without the ability to increase by a reasonable inflationary traditional number, you can't underwrite the project, because should incomes drop within the city limits, then of course these measurements will drop. And while I think they probably did drop in 08 and 09, that would be my guess. You know, Jeff? Okay. So the insurance company underwriting this project wants to see the ability to grow. I've given them the ability to performa, okay, it's all theoretical mathematics at this point, to grow the rents at a rate that's acceptable. And what we're doing in doing that is we're capping the revenue stream of the project. Okay, we're promising not to keep increasing rent should rents continue to grow at 4 or 5% in the marketplace, restricting, you know, our private sector ability to do that. The offset is the Luigi 724 in tax credits. This is a puzzle I put together over 18 months that now has 5 proposals for financing sitting on my desk that say, you get this done, this works, we can go. You pull a card out of it, and it's a financial house of cards that can only be compensated by speculating that we can grow rents faster. And that's not in anybody's best interest. I don't want to stick my neck out there either. It's a very, very expensive project, and it's very complex with the Brownsfield and other issues down there. It's just not an easy project to do, and it's going to come in. It's a couple $100,000 a key, guys. I mean, that's what these apartments are going to cost. And I'm promising to cap my income stream. I don't know how far I can push it and try and be socially minded and financially viable. It's the best thing to do.
I appreciate that you've obviously really struggled with this over a period of time and really wanted to maintain some of these workforce levels. When we were here in August of last year, you told us here that it was less about the affordable housing and more about being able to subsidize the leases for the small business. This go around, it seems like there's fewer small businesses, so I'm confused about that point too.
The grocery store, we're subsidizing heavily. It's the same model because all we've done is converted part of Klingman from retail to residential. So that space still costs the same to build, but nobody is going to finance putting retail up in front of Ferguson's, in the next couple of years. Just not going to happen. So this is a model that can get done, finance, close, start construction, be a big asset, and is going to provide 243 income, rent restricted on growth, apartments to the community on the public path, on the busway, the bicycle path. It's a great project. And it's been hell to get financed. If we take any of the incentives out of the puzzle, or if interest rates move another 1%, yada, 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 all bets are off. But right now, I can get it done. But we need you guys to approve it because my density is higher than the law allows, basically. It's that simple.
Mayor, I'm prepared to move to approve. And
We got to open the public hearing.
oh, I'm sorry, there is a public hearing.
You're right.
We'll do
Yeah.
that.
No, you're fine. Looks like no one else from the applicant is speaking. And are there any other questions or? Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. We're going to do A first, then we'll do B. Is there anyone wishing to comment on this item? I will close the public hearing. Do I have questions, comments, or a motion?
Motion here. I move to recommend approval of the conditional zoning request for Radloff's LLC for property located at 146 Robert Street from urban place to conditional zoning UPCZ to urban place conditional zone UPCZ, including the requested conditions, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, and is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans, in that the proposal supports the strategies found in the city's comprehensive plan on encouraging mixed-use development, especially in areas walkable to downtown and proximate to transit. The proposal supports the goal found in the city's comprehensive plan of pursuing more intense infill development where appropriate. And number 3, the design and uses create a pedestrian-oriented streetscape along Robert Street and part of Klingman Avenue extension. And one of the conditions that would be included here would be the condition that we just discussed relating to 3% increases annually over 10 years from the workforce schedule of rates. And Robin, we could state that in a more articulate way if we need to, but.
I think it's fine, and I'll just tell you what I wrote. I suppose that would help, that the 5% will be designated affordable, period, and the remaining 9% will be at or below the workforce rate for year 1 and will increase no more than 3% from that rate for each year thereafter for 10 years. Okay, so that's the motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Right, I have a motion and a second. Okay, any other questions, comments?
I have a couple of comments. I struggled with this last time it came up too, and ended up supporting the project and coming in a different place on the incentives than the majority of the group. And to have someone like Harry Pelos come and say, hey, I'm willing to deal with this brownfield because this is such an important site. I'm willing to include this mixed use and go for this urban place. I think it's an ambitious project, and there's a lot to like about it. I think I want to be supportive of the project itself as I was last time. When it comes to the incentives numbers, I fear I'll be in a different place than the rest of the group, because when it comes down to the affordability piece here, essentially we're talking about going over and above maximum density and ending up with 12 affordable units. Over the last several years, we've approved what amounts to thousands of apartments units in the city, with fewer than 100 of those mixed income developments being meaningfully affordable. So I think I'll be supportive of it, but it's a real mixed bag for me.
Any other comments? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's item A. Item B, related, is a public hearing to consider an amendment to the land use incentive grant for 146 Robert Street, Rad Lofts, and now we have Jeff Stottinger to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. In August of 2014, you approved a land use incentive grant for the Rad Lofts project. And that project at the time included 209 units of residential, 48,500 square feet of commercial, and the parking, et cetera, that you've heard about today. In concert with the change in the conditional zoning, the developer is requesting an amendment to that land use incentive grant. The developer is increasing the amount of housing generally to 243 residential units, which is an increase of 24 units, and decreasing the commercial square footage, which, by the way, can be figured on a variety of bases. For the purpose of this calculation, we're looking at net leasable space, just so you understand where that comes from, not including foyer space and public space or garage space, just net leasable commercial space. So the primary change in the proposal, for which in August of last year you're awarded 50 points, is the fact that there will be one more affordable housing unit, 33 additional workforce units, as was just defined, and that the net leasable commercial square footage drops below the 20%, for which you awarded 5 points last time, to about 16% of the total space in the project. Again, we have the commitment that the affordable housing units would be based upon, for the entire 10-year term of this agreement, would be based upon the 80% of median income rents, so no more than 30% of a person earning 80% of median income for those units would be chargeable in rent. And again, those numbers are here under the affordable housing standards. And that the workforce rents, however, would be able to be changed during, again, to that 3% maximum annual increase. Now, let's just review the last time you did award 50 points, and that did deviate from the general guidelines, the policy guidelines that you have in place. To review those again, you awarded 10 points for providing 5% of the units as affordable, 20 points for providing 95% of the units as workforce units, 5 points for green building for the Energy Star certification, 5 points for 20% non-residential, 5 points because the project is located within our sustainability bonus area, and 5 points for brownfield redevelopment. So the changes proposed would be that you would continue to keep the 5 points in place, although the percentage of commercial has dropped from 20 to 16%. And that is a summary of this. We'll note that also just to note that because the project does qualify for the state's brownfield program, which provides for a grant on a declining amount basis over a period of 5 years, and that's both city and state taxes, that this grant to allow for whatever your award would be, if it would extend beyond that 5-year period as we fill in the gaps on the brownfield grant, that it could extend beyond the 5-year period in terms of the ultimate award. But the award amount would not exceed a grant equal to the city taxes that were being levied against the project, city taxes only, for the first 5 years.
Jeff, the total incentive, Luigi, the 144,891 that we have, that's the annual. How does that compare to the August of 2014 annual grant?
No change. No change.
No change because
there's not been a change in the estimate of value in which the estimate of the grant amount is based. So the grant amount as awarded is based upon the actual difference between the tax assessment of the property prior to development and the tax assessment of the property at completion. So at this point in time, the best we can provide you is an estimate of what that tax assessment will be.
But so we've added
Residential units and replaced commercial units, but essentially looking at the big picture, we're essentially saying that the estimate of the project value is the same.
Okay.
And we had already varied from the points. We'd awarded more points than it would have been accorded in that original.
That is correct.
So just based on the policy as it's written, how many points does this qualify for?
This would, we would say 5 points for 5% affordable housing. We would say 15 points for greater than 75% workforce housing. And we would say an additional, so that's 20 points, and an additional 20 points for the Energy Star, the non-residential sustainability and brownfield, 40 points, or because today that commercial has fallen below the 20%, we would say 35 points.
Okay, 35 as it's written.
As of today, correct.
Just a plain application of our policy.
That is correct, absolutely. The project qualifies. I just do want to point out that the project meets all of the eligibility requirements as written in your policy.
And in August of 2014, how does that 35 compare? Also 35?
Yes, correct.
And this also then just assumes that this change, the 3% change, is still workforce housing.
That is correct.
So one could argue that actually the workforce housing points would go away.
Will likely stay workforce housing. I mean, one could also argue that the workforce housing is just the developer has asked for and you approved in the last thing, the ability to raise those rents, and whether they are raised or not is actually going to depend on the actual performance of the project.
The council does have flexibility under the standards to award more or less points depending on the project. So I do think that as you consider this, that you need to, even though there is this workforce element, that even if they are not workforce, as long as they're affordable, you still have the discretion to allow the grant or not. But as far as saying that you're actually allocating them to that without holding them to that, it may not exactly be accurate, even though you could still allow them to have the grant.
You just said it's subjective.
It's very subjective. You have discretion to allocate points at your discretion. These are suggested point allocations. You could decide to give them more points based on a factor that's different than what's actually in the policy, is what I'm saying.
Well, with recent experience, we've decided that we're going to revisit this entire scoring structure, and so we've acknowledged it wasn't perfect to start with. And
Could I expand a little on that, Mark?
Please.
You made the understatement of the year there. The Luigi grant, as Mr. Pilos has indicated, and as we've all struggled with up here, has been a very imperfect tool. And so Robin and her staff, along with Alan and his staff, and Jeff and his staff, are all working together to bring us a revised land use incentive grant that we hope is going to be able to create some more predictability in the process to take away some of the tug-of-war that we end up with up here.
I think that's a good point, and my takeaway from this experience has been that we probably need to allocate more points for affordable housing to get 5% and get 5 points. I mean, I think as a council, as a community, we've learned that we value affordable housing more than that particular ratio is reflected in this policy. 5% affordable should probably translate into 20 points or something like that. I think that we have, we've gotten some guidance out of this experience for us to retool this policy. This is a really important project, I think, for the continued transformation of the River Arts District. It's not happening just anywhere. It's a dense housing development, mixed-use development in the heart of the River Arts District, and on a piece of property that was once industrial. It is a brownfield site. I mean, I would like to send a message that our community welcomes this kind of growth in the River Arts District, and I think this is the kind of project that we were hoping to see incentivized through our policy, our incentive grant policy. This is not a perfect fit, I recognize, and again, hopefully will guide us in rewording our policy to better fit future projects, but I would like to support the approval of this request again, and I did last time, so that we can see this through to the end, this development, and for all the reasons I already said.
My take is that it's best to be predictable when you're dealing with developers, and that we should adhere to the rules as written at the time that we apply them. And if the rules need to be changed, that's fine. But the flexibility, the almost sloppiness of this doesn't appeal to me. I mean, it's the same reason we had a discussion at HCD recently about another project, and I feel the same thing on each of these Luigi applications. Okay, the policy's wrong, but that doesn't mean we should make exceptions to the rule over and over and over again. So I'll be opposing it.
I'd support 35 points.
Same here.
Someone remind me, did we open the public hearing? Okay, thank you. Why don't we go ahead and open the public hearing on this item? If there's anyone wishing to speak, please come forward now. No? Okay, I'll close the public hearing, and I interrupted some comments. Do I have any further comments or a motion? Yes.
For the reasons you said, I think it's very important to realize that the Luigi really started, it's an arbitrary figure, and we've been trying to make it work over the years, and I agree with Cecil that we should adhere to what we have written, but we really have not written it well at this point, and this is an urgent time. This thing's been dragging on, and I am supportive of approval of amendment to the land use incentive grant as requested, and approve a 5-year grant, 50% fee rate rebate land use incentive grant for 146 Robert Street, Radloff.
And that was a motion.
That was the motion.
Do I have a second?
Help me understand the support 35 points versus what Jan just did. What does that translate to in terms of financial outcomes?
It's in the, Jeff, do you have that off the
Just
top of your head?
summarize.
It's in the report.
The estimated annual grant, which I think is probably the easiest way to looking at this, is $1,444,891. So every year, or part of a year, would be times that roughly $145,000.
So you'd be looking at
50 points, if approved for 5 years, the grant would be $724,458 estimated.
And at 35 points.
I would need help with that math.
Yeah. Where's Barbara?
I see a lot of
It's 70%
happening
of that
there,
number,
thank
is what it
goodness.
is. It's 70% of that number.
507,000, something like that.
Well, I think that, we've heard that one councilman is likely not to vote for anything, and 3 are only comfortable at 35. So I think Jan's motion is destined to fail. And if we vote on that motion, is there a different motion that could come afterwards? Or if we vote on that motion and it fails, Robin, does it?
We didn't get a second on it.
Well, that's why, before I might, I'm just, if there's a vote on the motion.
If you have an alternative motion, you can have a different motion if the first motion fails.
Okay.
Unless it was a motion to just deny it. So, and it's a motion to, I think, Jan's motion is to approve as requested with 50 points, correct? Okay.
It's clearly not going to pass.
It's not going to pass, so I'll withdraw the motion.
Do you have a different motion?
Mayor, I'm prepared to
Okay.
make a motion to go to 40%, to see if we, to 40 points, excuse me, as a way to kind of find that middle ground there. I want to see this project go forward as well, too, and those are significant. I think that's the middle ground I could support.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second to award 40 points to this project. Any further comments or questions?
I would say 35 is the rule, so that's what I would support.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Do you want a show of hands? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, raise your hand. Okay. I couldn't see everybody. Was it 5-2?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Somebody go drag Harry out of the bathroom now, or wherever he just fled to.
That's Harry.
All right. Item C, a public hearing to consider a land use incentive grant for River Mills Lofts located at 300 Mill River Drive. And Jeff is making his way, and I just want to say, before we move on to this, that a good job, council. You always work hard for compromise, and most of the time we find it, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Let's see how this one goes.
This is an application for land use incentive grant for River Mill Lofts. You can see on the location map both its location, generally Thompson and Stoner Street. This was the subject, by the way, of a conditional use permit, which you did approve prior to this meeting. And it's a proposed development of 254 residential units and 8,000 square feet of commercial space. This will be in 2 buildings located on the site as seen here. The project, as presented to staff, meets equity requirements, Energy Star certification, residential development requirements, and is within the city limits, but the project is not within 1/4 mile of one of the designated transportation corridors, and the developer has requested a waiver of that policy requirement. I'll note that this is a policy requirement, and I'll also note that the HCD committee which reviewed this did not take a position as a committee on either that waiver or on the points requested. To go to the points for the project, the developer is requesting 50 points. Again, 50 points, each 10 point equated to 1 year of a grant equal to the City of Asheville taxes on that property. Green building, 5 points. Affordable housing, 7% of the units. The developer is requesting 10 points. Workforce housing, 85% of the units. The developer is requesting 50 points. And although the project does not meet any of the stated policy guidelines for mixed-use development, sustainability, or brownfield, the developer is requesting 20 points. Making the point that the development is a early adapter in that particular area of the city and meets many of the city's goals for sustainability, requires no utility infrastructure, served adequately by existing traffic systems, and use best management BMP, and is an important part of what will be the ultimate Wilma-Dykeman Riverway, which extends along the Swananoa River, and which the developer will be cooperative in terms of the bike paths and other public improvements that will eventually be made as part of that plan. We'll note that the staff has scored the project, and that project scores 5 points for its Energy Star. For affordable housing, it scores 5 points if we give the same kind of reasoning that we used, even though it doesn't meet the 10-point guideline. It's providing at least 5 points worth of affordable housing, and 15 points, which the developer did agree about in the score for workforce housing. Therefore, if council wanted to consider the waiver of an eligibility requirement, staff would score the project for 25 points. We'll note that the waiver of the eligibility requirement is the project is located 0.4 miles, actually from a couple different transit stops, one going up Fairview and the other out to the Hendersonville Road, Biltmore Avenue, and Biltmore Village. So it can be considered to be locationally efficient. And other developments proposed for that area are likely to create transit demand in some point in time, and it is along a multimodal route via the Wilma-Dykeman Riverway, which is planned contiguous to that site. The impact of this, the fiscal impact, is that if, again, looking at the difference between what the project value is, taxable value is today versus taxable value upon it's completed, it's estimated that the annual land use incentive grant would be $117,757. And then the actual value, of course, will determine that actual amount. The grant would be, if approved for 5 years, would be worth $558,785. If approved for 3 years, $335,000. And although I don't have the math for 2.5 years right in front of me, it would be, I think if we just take $50,000 and $55,000 off of that, it would be worth around $370,000. $280,000, excuse me. So the decisions in front of you on this are, one, whether you wish to waive the eligibility requirement, and then if you do, what is your award in points for the project?
Tell me again about the distance.
So the project is located 0.4 miles from the core of Biltmore Village and the Henderson Road, Biltmore Avenue there. It is along a relatively flat, although not sidewalked, access along Thompson Street directly into that Biltmore Village area.
And
It also is approximately the same distance to Fairview, which is also a bus line just going
And-
up the hill from the.
And what about to River Road? Isn't that just on the other side of the river? Yes?
Yes.
Do you know the distance? It's
Um,
gotta be-
They have to go up to Hendersonville Road.
Yeah, you have to go around, so it's at least 0.4 miles.
Swim.
I mean, it seemed like it was about a half a mile from 3 different transit locations.
Is it correct that that's a future greenway, there's a future greenway planned?
Which is along, this is the proposed Wilma Dykeman Riverway area right along there, and a master planned for Greenway. Now, that is not anywhere near as immediate as the River Arts District planned improvements.
Well, and it's also on the draft state transportation improvement plan. That's a DOT road.
Yes.
And there would be a massive redo of that road. And that would be the opportunity the community has to ensure that bikeability, walkability is included. There's really not a lot of room to squeeze a greenway in as it stands. So it would have to be integrated with the state's DOT project.
I would note, by the way, that I believe Clay Mooney is here representing the developer.
Jeff, how did they come up with 10 points for affordable, and we came up with 5 points? Same number.
Much the way that Mr. Pelos did.
They wrote it. Good answer,
And this is indicative to me of the slippery slope we face when we start making exceptions to our rules. So this will be my only comment. I'm going to oppose this because it doesn't fit the definition.
The distance requirement would have been a quarter mile.
That is correct. Your policy eligibility requirement states that, that the project is to be located within 0.25 of a mile of actually in the policy designated corridors. In this case, the designated corridor is the Biltmore Avenue Hendersonville Road corridor.
And that would have been good for 5 points?
Excuse me?
That would have been good for 5 points?
No, that is eligibility.
Oh, that's right.
So we wrestled with this at HCD on a couple of occasions, and let me tell you, it's no easier with a group of 3. And so that's why we brought it to y'all without a recommendation.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. As we said before, we're fixing the policy, and that's when we all get to applaud each other. But there were differences of opinion on whether to waive the transportation requirement. I would lean towards doing so in this case because there are so many options nearby and because of the future transportation plan there. In regards to the points, however, I think sticking to the points that are awarded there and going with that 25 based on the policy is where I would land. And I'd like to hear from some other folks.
You're saying yes to 25 points, yeah. And what's just our ETA to having a redone policy? I mean, if I were the applicant, I might consider waiting until the policy's redone, but.
I think Robin's going to get it to us week after next.
Well, we can get it done. I mean, we did rewrite it recently, and I do think that at the time we had reasons for going quickly, and now we've gotten some direction on how we need to go. I do think it's important when we bring it forward that we all, make sure that we're getting where we need to go. But we can do that fairly in the next, I think, month or so. Is that the plan, Jeff and Janice? To rewrite the land use incentive grant policy.
Yes. So staff is tasked with rewriting the land use incentive grant policy and currently plans to bring it to the HCD committee and to the PED committees in June. So we're working quickly as we can to try to bring some sense to the policy in terms of what we've learned of your priorities and some of the practical difficulties in trying to make it a real-world policy that works both for the city and the development community.
Jeff, while you're the developer is suggesting that it should qualify as a mixed-use development, and it's actually a fairly small percentage of the total
It is.
Footage here that's going to be used for anything other than residential, is that?
That is correct. And the developer didn't ask for specific points for the mixed use. It just kind of lumped it into, this is how we're meeting a variety of what we see as other city priorities.
Right, gotcha.
Unless there's other questions, is anyone from the developer, this is not mandatory, but would a representative with the developer like to speak on this? Sure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Clay Mooney. I'm a landscape architect with Design Associates here in Asheville, and I'm here representing the developer, Pace Burt. Unfortunately, he sends his regards. He is having to send his daughter off for a summer study in Europe, and so he is escorting her at the airport as we speak. So he apologizes for not being in attendance. I will try to be a good substitute, not as wordy possibly as Pace, but I'll try to be as concise as possible. And I would like to try to explain a little bit about how we arrived at our narrative and the application that we presented and how we sort of came to some of the point requests that we had in that narrative. And also, additionally, it's been mentioned about the eligibility aspect of that, the quarter mile restriction. We're sort of at the mercy of transportation and the location that we have. This is a pioneer development within that area. There's been several things that have been brought forth to council, has been approved, but nothing has ever gone to fruition. And this is a project that is going to be coming out of the ground. So we felt that, we realized that the affordable and workforce housing aspect was important with the city, and we were encouraged to try to go through this project in an effort to include affordable and workforce housing within this. This was just a conditional use permit application project. That is what we had to have for this based on our residential density. And so to put a little bit in perspective of how we are reviewing the quarter mile, our 4/10 of a mile is 800 feet longer. And it's, as Jeff said, it's the Swananoa River, Thompson Street is about as flat a street in Asheville as you'll find. That's probably about a 9, maybe 10-minute walk. And so we felt that that was kind of comfortable. Granted, there's no sidewalks or anything like that presently along Thompson Street, but it's also not walking on Biltmore Avenue nor Merriman Avenue. So there's a vast difference in traffic and potential conflicts. So having said that, that was how we were able to rationalize our request for a waiver for the quarter mile. I would like to point out just clarification of record. I don't know if this is any importance, but it's just something that I noticed in the staff report. There's a difference within our narrative and application within what's recorded in our staff report. The workforce housing is correct. We're requesting to provide or offering to provide 80% of the total units. And on the staff report, it says we were requesting 15. In actuality, we were requesting 20 points for that. The criteria is 75%. That is at which point you would receive the 15 points. Our logic was we're providing an additional 10%, and so that was how we sort of felt comfortable requesting the 5 additional points to be 20. And then with regard to the mixed-use development, sustainability, and brownfield, our point total request was 15 points, not 20 points as is stated in the staff report. And again, there were a lot of reasons that we felt comfortable lumping all those things together. No, we are not a brownfield. If you happen to read our narrative, we tried to explain fairly clearly why, while we're not a brownfield, we are located within a floodplain, and we also have a floodway that traverses our site. A brownfield, you can remediate the area and then you can build on it. There's no such avenue available with a floodway. It is what it is, and you're just stuck with it. So again, we have some of the similar difficulties associated with the brownfield. However, ours was with floodway and floodplain. And so again, that was why we felt that was a reasonable request. The mixed-use development, granted, we're not 20%, but again, there's nothing else in this area. Commercial or retail or whatever depends upon traffic. It depends upon bodies, head counts. That's what you need to drive those. We're the first person in that area. It would just be impossible almost to sustain 20% of our area for a commercial development where we don't have users available. So again, in addition to that, one of the other things with regard to the commercial or the mixed use goes back to our difficulty dealing with the floodplain and the floodway. If you remember our presentation, due to the floodplain, our finished floor elevation is 10 feet above the elevation of Thompson Street. That is just, commercial retail is basically right on the street level, and so it's impossible for us to do that. So that was another mitigating factor for our scaling back on the mixed-use component of this project. Let's see if there was anything else. As Jeff mentioned, the green building and all of that, Pace has worked very diligently. He's tried to find a way to incorporate the affordable and workforce housing within this development. Unfortunately, as Mr. Pelos sort of laid out to y'all, financing is it's a reality that every developer has to face. And Pace determined that the 50 points with the incentives that provided was the only means at which he could provide the affordable housing and the workforce housing in the percentages or the numbers that we set forth to you. So if there are any questions, I'll try to help. Please don't ask too many financial questions of me and all that. That's way out of my league, but if there's anything else with regard to how we came up with the points, I'll be happy to respond. If I may add, there's been a discussion, and there was even some discussion at the Housing and Community Development meeting, that this project, we're sort of too early in the process for what we're trying to do. There are a lot of things. And in my conversations with Pace, you know, if through the reworking of the Luigi program, if it becomes such that we might be able to achieve these 50 points after everything's kind of worked out, we're willing to voluntarily come back and try to work something. I mean, he feels strongly about affordable and workforce housing. It's a market that can be tapped. And it gives him just, you know, in addition to his market rate units. So that's something that we would be willing to consider should that. Now, granted, we have a certain limited time frame. Last week we were approved at final TRC, so we are moving forward, and you know, we need to get started as quick as possible. And one of our conditions for our conditional permit was to proceed through this process. And so we need to move ahead. But as Pace spoke to me, there is willing, if we can work something out and get to those numbers, there is a willingness to investigate it further in the future.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
I just want to underscore one of the points that he made, which is that when this project was passed under conditional zoning, one of the conditions that we put on there was this application process. Mm-hmm. We asked them to bring this to us. I just wanted to underscore that.
Okay.
And can you just remind me when we approved the zoning originally, affordable housing wasn't part of that?
No.
Wasn't part of the conditional? I didn't think so.
He wasn't, y'all didn't zone him you had a CUP, which is different. So he had to just prove that he was entitled to the use. It was not an affordable condition. It was not something that was really within your power at that time.
What's your timetable? You know, you said that you might have some flexibility to wait until the final product. While we can ask staff to move quickly on it, we can't ask them to move recklessly on it. So how long can you wait?
Well, part of the current Luigi guidelines, as I understand it, is that, no project that has pulled its building permit would be able to apply. Is that correct?
That's the way it's written right now.
Now, that's building permit, not grading or whatever. I mean, it says specifically in the language building permit. So we are hoping to get started as soon as we get all permits in hand to begin some of the grading and site work. But from the building permit standpoint, we may be 4 months away. So there is I think a narrow window of opportunity.
Not a lot of time.
And I would guess that if we are able to waive the distance, which is being requested here now, in the event, given that if we do not approve this now, we could probably waive the building permit requirement at a later date.
That's actually how it's written right now. I had to pull it out. It says, unless granted an exemption from city council, no grant will be allowed under this policy for projects which have received building permits. And you say you're about 4 months away from that anyway, right?
Don't necessarily hold me to that. Sometimes things go faster, sometimes they go longer. I mean, but I would say that that's a reasonable timeline.
Okay, let me go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to comment on this item? I'm going to close the public hearing. Questions, comments, or a motion?
I have one question, and the staff is recommending three years, so I'm assuming when I translate that to points, that's 30 points, right? Okay. And you got to 30 points just by getting to 20 and adding 10?
More or less.
No,
I would hate to feel that we were so random, although that would seem to be in line with the policy as it's practiced. No, I think that what we were looking at, I appreciated Clay's clarification, because I think that's where that came from, and my mistake, frankly, and I apologize in the staff report. They had asked for 20 points for the workforce, which to staff seemed reasonable because such a greater amount than the 75%, 95 was being promised, or 85% was being promised. So from the staff recommendation, it was the 5 points for Energy Star. It was 5 points for the affordable, the 7%, and the 20 points for the workforce housing. So that's where the staff recommendation came from. And again, I apologize both to the applicant and to you for misrepresenting that slightly on the staff report.
Okay. Is that the precursor to a motion?
Yes. I would, there's no wording in here. I would make a motion to approve the waiver of location eligibility requirement and approve a 3-year land use incentive grant for the River Mills Lofts development.
Okay, and
And why?
Yes, if you can see here, there's some proposed reasons, which I think you could incorporate by reference from the staff report if those are the ones you would like to include.
Do you want me to read them?
No, you can just incorporate.
Okay, then I would incorporate these three points in the staff report about basically that you've got 3 transit routes within 0.4 miles of the site, that it's close to, it's on the Wilma-Dykeman Riverway, and right, and that it's close to the Wilma-Dykeman Riverway, therefore that's, the eligibility waiver is reasonable.
Okay, we have a motion, and do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay.
We'll get those changes to everybody as quickly as humanly
Yes,
possible.
really, really. Not recklessly, but pretty quickly. Item D, a public hearing to consider conditional zoning for property located at 53 Logan Circle from RM8 Residential Multifamily Medium Density District to RM16 CZ Residential Multifamily High Density District conditional zoning for the construction of 16 townhome units with conditions regarding setbacks, sidewalks, and infrastructure improvements. And I have Sasha Vertinsky here.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, and members of the public. My name is Sasha Vertinsky, as already stated, and I'm bringing forward the Brewery River Road project, a proposed conditional zoning in West Asheville. It's located at 53 Logan Circle, across from the New Belgium Brewery, and it's along Craven Street with Georgia Street to the west, and the very top of the property is here on Logan Circle. So this proposal is for 16 townhomes, 8 of which are on Craven Street, in 2 clusters of 4 units, and then another cluster of 4 units along Georgia Street, and the 4 remaining units are on Logan Circle in clustered 2 together, 2 sets of 2. All the townhomes are 3 stories and with a maximum height of 37 feet. And if I didn't say this already, this property is currently zoned RM8, and they're requesting a conditional zoning to RM16, so effectively doubling the density. The project has frontage on all 3 streets, and Georgia Street will be widened to 20 feet wide. It is a 2-way street currently and will remain so. And Georgia Street will also get a 6-foot sidewalk, which is not there right now. As you know, the city is currently working on Craven Street and making improvements to Craven Street. Parking spaces are being provided as required, and in addition, the applicant's working with the city to provide 7 additional spaces along Craven Street in between bump outs. The setbacks are probably the biggest tweak to the zoning district. The standard setback for this zoning district is 15 feet, and they're requesting an adjusted setback of 6 feet along Craven and 10 feet along Georgia Street, which in the regular setback will be on Logan, and staff is fully supportive of this. So here are some elevations of the townhomes on Craven Street, kind of a more modern look. That's from the front. They'll be very similar on Georgia Street. And then the units on Logan Circle, they've asked their architect to change the architecture to make it fit more in with the surrounding houses, which I think is appropriate. This project was reviewed by the Technical Review Committee and then by the Planning and Zoning Commission on April 1st. And Planning and Zoning voted 6-0 to recommend approval with the conditions as presented in the B1 conditions list. This project supports strategies in the City Development Plan 2025 by using infill development in places with existing infrastructure, and also in places where it's supported by alternative modes of transportation. The transit line is very close by on Haywood Road, and also we'll have the greenway going by the New Belgium Brewery. So staff is recommending approval of the proposed conditional zoning to allow for construction of the 16 townhomes.
Thank you. Any questions of Sasha before we hear from the applicant?
I noted in the Planning and Zoning report that one of the members there asked about the price points of the housing, and there was a response, but it wasn't listed in the report.
Okay. I'll let the developer talk about that. I don't know the answer to that question.
We're having a star appearance tonight from our long-lost Gerald Green, I believe.
look at
Look
this.
at that. Wait, I thought you were moving to Tennessee.
I am. I appreciate the, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I appreciate your consideration of this request. And I was thinking back there, it's almost 26 years to the day since I first made my first presentation in this council, and I was scared to death. And I thank Maggie Burleson for getting me through 14 years of making presentations as a member of staff and several years, I guess 12 years as a consultant. And I appreciate the friendships of people like Councilman Davis from the Planning and Zoning Commission, from Councilman Pelley from neighborhood associations, Councilman Smith from sharing offices, and I guess Councilman Hunt from raising kids and drinking beer. And the mayor is an intern
Little baby
when I worked for the
intern,
planning
that's right.
department. So and Councilman Bothwell is the only one who I didn't work with closely, but I appreciate all the work that you've done to manage the success of Asheville. When I came here in 1989, it was certainly a far different community, and I'm proud to have worked with dedicated volunteers from the community, great staff people, and the various council members and planning and zoning commissions over that period of time to get Asheville.
Your love is so deep, you're moving away.
I have to take some of that experience
Right.
to a place that has done a lot of good since I went to graduate school there, I have to admit, but it still has opportunities to succeed. I'm looking forward to be a part of that. But on to this one, I guess, and sorry for that diversion. So I am the spokesperson for the Brewery River Road project team. The project team includes Wanda and Joel Renninger, Joshua Robinson and Philip Ellis are the project engineers. Joel Osgood is the project landscape architect. And we've worked hard to blend this into the community. The project developers actually live on the site and will live on the site after the development is completed. We've worked with the community, and Sasha showed you the images of where we changed on the Logan Street to a craftsman-style design to blend in with that community there. The more modern industrial style along Craven Street and Georgia Street will blend in with the brewery that's under construction there. So we'll try to create a community that blends with the existing community. We're requesting this zoning change for the increased density to allow the townhouse development, and the conditional part with the reduced setbacks to create a true townhome community that addresses the street closely, a reduced setback. Unfortunately, that guy who headed up the rewriting of the UDO now about 20 years ago did not think about townhomes back then as a viable option. And times change, and so we're happy to be on the forefront of this model, and hope maybe the staff will look at ordinance changes to allow townhome development along certain streets in those areas that are appropriate. We also will develop quite a bit of improved infrastructure. As Sasha mentioned, the improvement to Georgia Street sidewalk. There are also water and sewer improvements. So we're benefiting the community in a couple of ways, both by providing housing to help meet some of the housing shortages of the community, but also trying to contribute to the public infrastructure. With regard to the question about the cost of the housing, these will be market rate. And I think after listening to your discussion of the land use incentive grant programs and other programs, you may be happy that we're not going into that type of discussion this evening. So with that, I have nothing further to state. We're excited to be part of this improvement in the River Arch District. It's great to see the work that's going on in that area and listen to the projects that are underway in that area. And to be a part of that is quite an honor for us, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Does anyone have any questions?
Gerald, the other designs, the contemporary looking designs, seem like they're good candidates for solar. Is that the roof lines on those? Is that part of the plan?
Okay. No firm decision. We'll certainly keep that in mind.
I appreciate you bringing some townhomes. I think that it is something that I'd like to see more of going up. I think it's a really efficient use of space, and I live right around the corner on Euclid Boulevard from where these will be built, and it seems like a really appropriate use there. I think as we look at those townhome ordinances as well, it'll probably be helpful to begin. We've focused so much of our affordability efforts around rental housing, and being able to pivot and starting to look at some of that by owner housing is also going to be really important. The Bowen report also made it very clear that there is a paucity of affordable housing, and only 1/4 of the available housing stock is affordable to 2/3 of our working population. So it's 2/3 of the people looking for 1/4 of the stock. And if I were to guess, this stock doesn't fall in that quarter. It falls in this upper 3/4 that 1/3 of the people are looking for, and that there's a lot of folks like yourselves who are jockeying for that market. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we've also got this enormous need that is unmet. And so going forward, as we're looking at for sale affordability, I think townhomes may be one of the areas we can find answers.
Yes, I think so. They are efficient use of the land, and this property has some topographical challenges that makes the townhome model even more appropriate for it.
Any other questions? Okay, all right. Why don't I go ahead and open the, thank you, open the public hearing. If there's anyone wishing to comment on this item. If you could come forward to the microphone and state your name. Sorry, we get all formal so everyone on TV can see you.
My name's Andrea Larson, and I'm a neighbor of Joel and Wanda. We really love them. Everybody in the neighborhood does. I think one of our concerns, a lot of the people, is that it's a single-family neighborhood right now. And you're proposing something that's going to drastically change the footprint of that. I don't think any of us have a problem with what's going on Craven or Georgia, but it's the concern of what's happening on Logan.
So is the question, or you're just stating the concern?
It's just, that's a concern. I mean, like, as I said, I want to tell anyone what they can do with their property. We love our neighbors. We're all it's a nice, close-knit community, but we're concerned about what it does to the footprint of that street on top, because it really changes it. There are no condos there now. It's all single-family homes. No one has a problem with the development below. It's the development specifically up top.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? All right, I will close the public hearing. Questions, comments, a motion?
I'd move to approve the conditional zoning request of Asheville Property Incorporated for property located at 53 Logan Circle from RM8 to RM16 CZ, including the requested reduced setbacks on Georgia and Craven Streets, and find that the request is reasonable in the public interest and is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans, in that, one, the proposal supports the goal found in the city's comprehensive plan of pursuing more intense infill development where appropriate, and two, the proposal supports the goal found in the city's comprehensive plan of infill development that takes advantage of existing infrastructure and is close to transit and alternative transportation options.
Second. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments?
Just a quick comment that looking at the proposal, it looks like 4 of the housing units will be off of Logan, 2 attached to each other on separate locations there. And I think it's a relatively, from my perspective, a relatively small change from the overall character of the neighborhood. But I understand the concerns about that, but still intend to support this.
Okay, anyone else? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, the next item is item F, because we continued item E to June 9th. Item F is a public hearing to consider an amendment to Article 13 of the Unified Development Ordinance to expand options for real estate and construction signage, and Chris Collins is here to speak on this.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm Chris Collins, City of Asheville Development Services. Sorry, go ahead. Wait until. This is a familiar request to most of you. It was heard before by council, and the original request was recommended for, or was not recommended for, but was denied by council. And subsequently, the applicant behind this did submit a new request that has gone back through the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I'm going to make a real quick recap on what we did, and then I just have one slide for you guys to look at, and I'll tell you about the new request. Previously, this is concerning construction signage when it's attached to construction fencing or screening. And that is, for instance, the center of this question is revolving around what is up with the City Center project and Hilton Garden Inn project at 301 and 309 College Street. And that is the white material attached to the fence that has lots of logos and images on it right now. And that application was made by the contractor on this for Illinois Construction. They're looking to reduce the regulation that we place on this type of signage. Right now, the only way our UDO speaks to this is to mention the 32 square foot freestanding construction sign, which is, for our research at the time, what most jurisdictions in North Carolina address. So the previous planning and zoning recommendation that we brought forward to you was for an allowance of 50 square feet of signage spaced 20 square feet apart linearly. It was required to be done in lieu of the freestanding sign that our ordinance now addresses, and there was no direct regulation on what type of elements of the development could be promoted through this signage. After doing some further research, because of most of our North Carolina municipalities addressing construction signage based on the freestanding aspect like we do right now in the city, we expanded our search somewhat to look at some larger cities where you see more of this screening and signage material. Looked at what was happening or how it was being handled in places like Atlanta, and we ended up looking at regulations in Pittsburgh, which don't seem like very near places, but they are on the East Coast, and we really had to reach out there to find some examples. And in most cases, it was not limited in spacing or size, but more so limited in what elements of the project were being advertised or communicated through the signage. In most cases, it was in lieu of freestanding. I will say that going back and digging deeper into the regulations of some other North Carolina cities, most often the definition of construction signage did limit it to the elements that we are in this report right here. Those elements, about to read you the wrong staff report.
Nice catch.
Yeah. You would have been like, wait, we've heard this. What we're proposing right now is that the construction signs attached to construction screening be limited to showing images and or renderings of the project as it is to be constructed, approved site and or landscaping plans. Those are generally the least technical in nature of those, a little easier to read. And the name and contact information of people who are associated with the development. In this case, we've said developers, contractors, and or financiers or investors. And that does, to most degree, mirror what we found in definitions in Greensboro and Charlotte and places like that regarding what is allowable imagery on these construction screening signages or construction signs. The other change to the text is not really a change, but a relocation. Item C in the proposed text in your report states that construction signs shall not be erected prior to the issuance of now it says building permit. We're changing that to grading because that's when your site disturbance actually begins and when people look for these. And that the signs be removed within 7 days of an issuance of certificate of compliance. That's the same language we have now. We've just broken it out into an item C to hopefully clarify the way it reads. Again, just to summarize, based on the revised request we received from Illinois Construction, who is the contractor working at the City Center and Hilton Garden Inn sites, we have taken through the planning and zoning and come back with a recommendation from that body that you see above in front of you. And in the proposed wording amendment, that's essentially to allow this signage when attached to construction screening and used in lieu of freestanding construction signs without limitation on size or spacing, but with limitations as listed on what images and text can be displayed.
Do you want some clarification on who wrote this and who?
Got it from Shannon already. You got it too in an email.
Okay.
So in the staff report, there was an example from Atlanta. I note that it says that the sign shall be restricted to project-related information, but then in the example, it had like an advertising slogan. I'm just wondering how, if that counts as project-related info.
I think in our case, we've specifically listed the type of information that can go on there, and it's kind of tricky when you're regulating what content can be there, but really it needs to be tied to the project. It's hard to say an application of how this would actually go, but I guess if they had a slogan, you could probably consider that project information.
This is where I start to get hung up, and I understand that some people feel the aesthetics are better with a series of advertising signs along a street versus a fence where you can see construction. For me personally, that might not be an improvement. I understand that for others, they may feel that it is an improvement, but essentially what this would do would be to allow kind of a series of billboards along a street. And now it's my understanding that it would also help when truck drivers are delivering to know where they're going, and for people walking by to understand what's getting built there, and those things make a lot of sense to me. However, providing free advertising to people with the most money doesn't. So I get a little hung up on this.
Gordon, where are you saying you saw that example?
In the report.
I'm looking for the
It is.
The link on our agenda.
Oh, where'd it go? Maybe it was in an email.
It was an email from the.
It is in the report. If you go above, the best reference I can give you is where it states the current text of section 713 2D7. And,
Say that number again.
all right. Better first reference, second page of the staff report. There's a section that states what the current ordinance reads. A single line above number 7. And 2 paragraphs up is where it does cite the findings from some of the City of Atlanta research.
It says images and/or renderings of the project as it is to be constructed, approved site and/or.
Well.
And for landscaping plans, name and contact info of developers.
Right.
So you can put landscaping plans on the sign is what this is content, and then the name and contact information of the developers, contractors, or financiers engaged in work on the site.
That's what we're suggesting that it be limited to now.
So is the example that was emailed out consistent with that restriction on content?
The example that was emailed out.
With the one in Atlanta that had the tagline on there.
Oh, well,
yeah.
I would have to reference that again. I don't.
I think it did too, and I don't. It doesn't look like it meets these.
Okay.
But Chris is saying that it can get tricky when you're starting to regulate content.
So you haven't seen this sign that Gordon is talking about?
I don't know that I have.
Oh, well, I'm just trying to confuse you then, it seems. Okay.
Okay, I deleted it.
Apologies, Chris.
No, I apologize for not.
So apparently we were emailed from some.
Oh, we've got a visual aid.
High tech now.
I think it gets difficult to define what is, what is a slogan and what is a description. So I'm not sure we want to try to anticipate every eventuality. I mean, I'm okay with this, and if we have problems.
I don't know that the example signage emailed to us would be allowed under our proposed restrictions.
It was unclear to me, that's why I was asking. One other question I had was a minimum setback of 10 feet required. When I look at a place like Hyatt Place over here it's bang up against the street, how would they just get a variance there? How would that look?
Let me just take a look at that real quick.
I don't know how the setback requirement's going to work on many projects downtown.
Yeah, they're supposed to build to the lot line.
Now that is under 7A, which is the freestanding construction signs. So that does only apply to the freestanding signs.
Oh, the freestanding, that's not the screening. Understood. Thank you.
So no setback required.
No setback on the screen.
I saw one email, I think it came from one of the companies, the contractor, that they claimed that screening around that project cost $20,000, and it made me think I should get into the business. But it seems to me that most of that is just the cost of printing on it. I mean, you could put up a white or a green would even be nice cloth screen way cheaper than that. And I'm really uncomfortable with writing a law to make one project legal, which is practically what we're doing right here. I mean, it's like, okay, you know, we have a violation, and now we're going to write a law that makes it okay. I'm really not comfortable with it.
Do we have any other questions of staff before we open the public hearing on this item?
I've noticed there's a representative from Vanoy here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective on this.
Okay, let me officially open the public hearing. The public hearing is open.
Hi there. Thank you all for hearing me. Mayor, council people, this is my first time before the council. My name is Brian Walker. I manage Vanoy Construction's Asheville office here. I'm here before you related to the violation up at City Center as we responded and received that notice. We've worked all over the country, and this is typical of our projects to put up screening like this with signage on it to that nature. In fact, we did it down on Long Shoals Road within city limits on our medical office building project down there. And so, as you can see, it came to a surprise to us to hear that we were actually in a violation of an ordinance, because we never figured that was signage. It's just how we like to conduct our business. As I emailed you prior, there's two main significant reasons of why we do the screening. One is for safety purposes. As you can imagine, we get some pretty large deliveries, sometimes on fast-moving roadways. And so it's a way to identify the site of here it's coming, as opposed to just having one sign at the entrance. And by the time they get there, they're either trying to figure out how to get back or what have you from a safety perspective. It also keeps small debris. It helps with keeping dust inside the site. So those are some of the safety perspectives. The aesthetic perspectives, similar to what I emailed you earlier, and I can bring this back up here in a second, but there's an aesthetic appeal to this. One, it helps conceal what to me is a lovely site, a construction site, but to others, not quite as appealing, especially in as much of a tourist town as Asheville is. It also gives an opportunity, so that's the screening in itself. It also gives an opportunity to provide some images that interest the public, to let them know what is coming to the project, things of that nature, who's responsible for the project. So those are the main purposes behind the screening. That said, the screening is very expensive. And while, yes, I agree with Mr. Bothwell that the $20,000 does include printing, it's half the cost is probably the printing and half is the screening. So it's still a significant investment for a project that we happily take on, because it's part of the professional way we like to represent our sites. That said, I still have to represent and report to leadership and justify spending money. And so this creates an opportunity to justify that. It provides branding for the companies involved with the project. It involves an opportunity for the developer, the owner, to give images of what he's proud of that he's going to be presenting to the public. Our intent is never to clutter advertisements. It's only for stakeholders of the project, as was mentioned by Chris. I apologize for this coming before you again like this. There was some miscommunication, and I wasn't able to be here to kind of inform and give some reasoning behind why we were doing this. And it is truly not to get our city center project out of violation. It really is, because like I said, it was a complete surprise to us that was in violation. And we want to continue to do this fence screening for future projects. So it's really for a longer term reason that we're bringing this before you. As Chris mentioned, this has been through the DTC as well as the planning and zoning twice. All times it received approval, support from those committees. And I guess I'll leave you with, I feel if we don't do this, it takes away an incentive for putting up these screenings, which I think add value to the city, as I mentioned before, especially in a city that has a lot of tourists that come to the city. So that's really all I have to present to you. I'm looking for your support in approving this wording amendment. I did email some pictures earlier showing some examples of sites without construction screening and examples with construction screening. I've got some here on my tablet. I'd be happy to show if any of you did not receive it or care to see it as part of your decision-making process. But again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to comment on this item?
Just a short note.
We're-
Oh, wait, public hearing.
Any questions for me?
We're good, good. All right. Anyone else wishing to comment? Okay. You had a, yes?
Jan warned me years ago that messing with sign ordinances is a recipe for a lot of trouble because, well, I can't remember exactly why you said because, but because there's as many perspectives on what signs ought to look like as there are people, and that trying to put these things together can be very complicated because it's such a subjective measure. What the representative from Vinoy was saying was that this is an incentive to provide the screening, which some people feel is an aesthetic improvement. It doesn't seem that this would require screening, which I would have a problem with because I think it could reduce affordability for some folks. So I think I'm going to cautiously support this thing with the knowledge that trying to keep retooling it and rewording it could just leave us going in circles. So with that, I'll move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other questions or comments? I think I would just note that Jan has wise words that we're going to miss. These are wise words, Jan.
I've stepped in those traps.
Yeah, we can learn from your.
I think the council's 20 years from now will still be wrestling with signs, even if there's a massive overhaul where we think we've got it right.
Okay. All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All right. And finally, we have a public hearing to consider an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance to Section 7-8-1 to allow replacements of telecommunication towers and support structures in all zoning districts. Alan Glines, patiently waiting.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council, members of the public. In the UDO, we have this definition for telecommunication tower, support structure, replacement tower. We haven't had a place where it's permitted, but we'd like to correct that tonight through a wording amendment that would add this use under other uses permitted in all districts. The reason we would do that is the towers need to be replaced over time. They wear out. There actually has been some building changes to the building code that requires a greater wind loads standards and structural standards for the tower base. So when towers are originally permitted in the city, they go through a conditional use permit process in front of you all, and to replace them should be a simpler matter, and we'd like to correct that tonight. They will still be required to get a permit, but they won't need to have a public comment since that they're just replacing like for like, same height, within 100 yards. So we think it's a pretty simple thing. We'd like to clarify this. This will be of assistance to private carriers as well as the city of Asheville. I can answer any questions if you like.
So to clarify, where this would allow the replacement of existing towers, even if they're non-conforming in that district?
Correct.
Okay. But not additional, nothing additional?
No additional height and
no additional towers. I'm concerned about making it clear that we're not allowing additional cell towers, say in a residential district that doesn't allow them.
Right. All towers, all new towers come to you all through a conditional use permit process. So that will be in place as it is in the books today.
So kind of a technical correction. Would you say this is in the nature of sort of a technical correction? No?
I would say so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say so. It's still, you're allowing what you have already approved to be replaced without coming back to you. But but it's a use that is defined and not in the list, so it needs to get in there. So if you're comfortable with that, I think that's good.
I would move to approve the proposed amendment to section.
Let me open the public hearing really quickly.
Can't you have a public hearing after a motion?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Anyone wishing to comment on this item? No? Okay, closing, I know.
Okay.
Closing the public hearing.
Second.
I move to approve the proposed amendment to section 781D as outlined in this report, and find that the request is reasonable and consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans because it allows for community infrastructure to be maintained, enhances public safety, and encourages economic growth and investment.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anyone wishing to, questions, comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The last item on our printed agenda, the Vice Mayor will handle.
Mayor, we have 2 openings on the Civil Service Board to make appointments to. We have 5 candidates: Carol Goins, Tom Duckett, Alan Eskovitz, Pam Holcomb, and Michael Bacote have applied. The council today was able to interview 3 of those applicants: Ms. Goins, Mr. Duckett, Mr. Eskovitz. Pam Holcomb and Michael Bacote were not available for interviews. The city clerk pointed out that one option could be to make sure we interview those folks before we decide. It may be that we, council members, are prepared to go ahead and appoint. And Councilwoman Whistler, I think we'll start on your end this time. And
This time?
I would suggest, do we do that every time?
Pretty much.
Okay, next time we'll start on that end, so you be ready next week.
Ready.
Somebody remember.
Now, so I think each council member could either name 2 people or 1 person, or say, I'd rather interview before deciding at all. But the bottom line is that if any 1 or 2 members get 4 votes from council, they are therefore appointed. So
I'd be comfortable and happy to appoint Ms. Goins and Mr. Eskovitz.
Same thing, Goins and Eskovitz.
Ditto.
And I would concur, and just, did you mention this already, Mr. Duckett? Does he live in the city of Asheville? No.
They all were.
It says Candler on,
I checked all
it's
the
wrong.
residency.
So it says Candler on his application, but that's
Well,
not
he
correct.
could live in Candler, but he's still within the city limits.
Yeah.
I did double check everybody
Okay.
before.
yeah, there are Candler mailing addresses out there.
Okay.
Okay, so that's 4 votes. I would vote the same.
Me too.
The same, unanimous?
So it's unanimous, just for the record. And that concludes.
All right. Quick. Okay, we have 2 folks signed up to speak. The first is Rowdy Keeloff. Please state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Rowdy Keeler. I'm a co-founder of a cigarette recycling organization called Friends Against Butts. And for months now, I've been contacting Richard Grant, is that right? Head of Sanitations. And he has been unresponsive. In fact, tells me he'll call me back and then doesn't. So what we're offering is to recycle the city's cigarette waste because it's already collected. You know, the smokers' outposts attached to the recycling and the waste. It's already collected separately, so if it would just be, when the city goes around to collect it, if it would be put in a separate container or bag or something, we're willing to recycle it at no cost to the city. 44% of Asheville's landfill is either recyclable or compostable, which is a big problem, especially cigarette waste, because it's leaching toxins into our soil, maybe our water. So I don't know what to do because Richard Grant is unresponsive. So he told me to contact my councilman, and I decided to talk to all of you at once. So what do I do?
Rowdy, what do you recycle them into? What do you do?
Well, we work with a company in New Jersey who turns them into industrial plastics, like plastic pallets, plastic park benches, and even, ironically enough, ashtrays. It is what it is, and we're actively working with Orange Peel, Wicked Weed, Gray Eagle, all these different places around town collecting and recycling their cigarette waste. But every week that Mr. Grant goes without responding to me, hundreds of pounds of cigarette waste go to our landfill where they don't need to. So what do I do? Who do I talk to?
Mr. Jackson, would you like to?
I'll get you a response and council response on the status and the potential of this. Would be helpful to know if you haven't already provided it to Mr. Grant, some other clients you have, municipal clients, and some background information. If you've already sent that to him, I'll pick that up from him and we'll get a response back to council soon. I'd like to share that information with council.
We have no other municipal clients, meaning, what does that mean? Other cities?
Cities, other cities.
Yeah, no, we're Asheville based and we've only been around for a few months. So we're starting locally.
Okay.
We are a 501c3 certified organization, if that means anything.
I'll be interested to hear what you find, and thank you for coming here and letting us know what you're trying to do. It sounds like it's worth doing.
Yeah, and so am I waiting to hear from somebody, or do I contact somebody?
Can you follow up with Mr. Jackson? Yes.
Okay. Great.
Thanks. Okay, the second person I have signed up to speak is Jonathan Rowe Bear.
Last but not least, I guess it was at last meeting that Mr. Jackson used the analogy that he needed to sharpen his pencils so that we could figure out how to give folks a living wage raise who are currently not a part of the living wage in this community, even though we tout it so highly. So tonight, I brought a pack of 20 unsharpened pencils. And I have the names of people who work here at the city that make less than living wage. So I'm going to go ahead and give this to Mr. Jackson. Now, yeah, I know y'all recently finished a study, and I think that study cost about $200,000, right? Ironically enough, that's pretty much the amount that needs to go to these people so that they can make a living wage. Excuse me. So, Mr. Jackson, leadership is not outsourcing a bad decision to a consulting company so that they can tell this council and the rest of this community that you can't give these folks a living wage. And I know that we're now trying to chisel and trying to figure out who's temporary and who's not and all that good stuff. How about we just give all of these folks, all 350 of them, the raise that they deserve? And if that impacts other people's wages, then you know what? We've been choking on trickle-down economics for 30-something years now. It would be lovely to see that ripple up economics. It'd be great. So, get to work sharpening those pencils, Gary.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, and we do not have a closed session, so we stand adjourned.